He's in here!
Hello, and welcome back to Video Games. I'm Tim Rogers. You are watching the action button review of The Last of Us, a video game developed by Naughty Dog LLC and published by Sony Computer Entertainment for the Sony PlayStation 3 computer entertainment system on Friday, June 14th, 2013, and on the Sony PlayStation 4 computer entertainment system on Tuesday, July 29th, 2014. Directed by Neil Druckmann and Bruce Straley. Written by Neil Druckmann. With an original musical score by two-time Academy Award winner Gustavo Santaolalla, starring Troy Baker as Joel and Ashley Johnson as Ellie. For those lacking the constitution to view this review in full, let us begin with the bottom line. The Last of Us is a great game. By default. I don't mean to imply the game came without effort. When I call The Last of Us great by default, I simply mean that it represents the destination at the end of a path honest and true. The Last of Us's makers made all 12 play hours of The Last of Us the way Ernest Hemingway'd have written a sentence, except with more crafting ingredients and video game graffiti. The Last of Us demonstrates the powerful result of a creative investigation aiming to locate the precise truths at the core of its superficial inspirations. The Last of Us is a great video game composed out of provably true conclusions about other great video games. When I announced in my video review of the Final Fantasy VII Remake that I'd review The Last of Us next, I received many concerned questions and comments from viewers wanting to know why I'd picked such a quote-unquote normal game. I like to reply to a lot of my Twitter DMs, usually cryptically. I told some viewers that all the ladders in the Final Fantasy VII Remake had reminded me of The Last of Us's puzzles. I told others that after playing the Final Fantasy VII Remake, I wanted to try reviewing a game with no filler. One individual told me that when they hear the name The Last of Us, they think of, quote, just another zombie shooting stealth game, unquote. Replace zombie shooting stealth with survival horror, grim dark dad, awards bait, AAA, or prestige, and you just about have the measure of the comments. Now, I won't directly disagree with any of these analyses. However, I'll apply to these concerns here in this video the same reply I offered to many Twitter direct messages.
Sounds like you should just watch my review anyway.
In this review, I plan to go to exhaustive and exhausting length to communicate how The Last of Us amounts to a mountain's worth more than the sum of its parts, or the summary of its particular inspirations. I hope to illustrate to you that The Last of Us is not derivative. It is a video game made of video games. The Last of Us is not just a zombie game. No, The Last of Us overachieves with shrill profundity upon the salted graves of each tired trope of those video game genres and subgenres that made it. The Last of Us stretches down its majestic neck and clamps hard onto the lowest hanging fruits with teeth unbelievable. The Last of Us is not just a dad game. The Last of Us is not just a modern AAA single-player awards-baiting action video game. The Last of Us is the dad of all modern AAA single-player awards-baiting action video games. The Last of Us's designers scavenged video game history and took only exactly as much as they needed to make an objectively great video game. In doing this, they calculated an ironclad mathematical pathway connecting Resident Evil, Metal Gear Solid and Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare 1. Therefore, to study The Last of Us is to glimpse every crystalline particle of work that a game designer does today. In other words, I want to review The Last of Us because I consider it to be the perfect representative of the prestige era of video games. We could call The Last of Us the Sopranos of video games. That'd make BioShock Infinite the Wire of video games in a parallel universe where The Wire isn't good. Reviewing The Last of Us, a video game made of video games, is probably the best possible way to truly begin my series reviewing great video games. The connections we forge here today between The Last of Us, a great game by default, and the Final Fantasy VII Remake, a good game that I like despite its faults, will finalize the building of the Action Button Method's mysterious toolbox. At last equipped with completed tools, we can go on to assess my long, quirky, stupid list of favorite video games that I started this series so I'd have a pay-checkered excuse to play them again. All those reasons aside, I want to review The Last of Us because The Last of Us is one of the few video games I actually own a physical copy of. You've perhaps noticed by now, detective, that I am not like quote-unquote other YouTubers. Most unimpressively, you will notice that I lack an overburdened shelf of shockingly overvaluable vintage video games in my backdrop. The more eagle-eyed in the audience might have already noticed that I present to you from a barren living room. I did own a shocking mountain of then slightly appreciated, now borderline priceless video games once in the far past. Basically, I had in 2001 just about everything you'd see if you searched eBay for expensive video game today in 2020. I sold my entire appreciating game collection piecemeal for ridiculous bargain prices so as to afford an escape from the American Midwest because, to be honest, I was a privileged 22-year-old recently college-graduated American male and I believed myself entitled to a globe-spanning adventure. I accumulated another large collection of video games in my eventual new home of Tokyo, Japan, as an individual in my late 20s. This second collection was quirkier and made up of less fiscally stressful, though more spiritually valuable to me video games, such as the complete Dragon Quest series. Ponkotsu Romandai Katsugeki Banpi Torotto, Zettai Zetsume Toshi 2, Garoden Break Blow Fist or Twist, Armodyne, Berwick Saga, God Hand, Berserku Sennen Teikoku no Takahen Seimasen ki no Shou, and various other video games I loved for reasons no one else had given to me. I made those reasons myself. Well, I lost that game collection in a philosophical accident. In my new home of Oakland, California, between 2010 and 2017, I accumulated another game collection, mostly consisting of trash and handouts. At some point, either to indulge my precious minimalism or perhaps in a moment of dark reflection upon the trauma of having lost two equally massive, differingly priceless game collections in diametrically dissimilar philosophical accidents, I began to build a digital library. In 2015, I was the first American man in history to ever come home from a business trip to Japan with less than one full suitcase of vintage Japanese video games. In fact, I only brought one game back with me from that trip. Berserku Sennen Teikoku no Takahen Seimasen ki no Shou. In 2017, I konmari'd my physical video game collection. I dumped the trash and handouts into the trunk of my decommissioned Ford Crown Victoria Police Interceptor. I let a friend pick through them. Somehow, he ended up taking all of them. Vito, that was disgusting. You need to clean your house. I moved cross-country to New York City. My belongings languished in a buddy's Californian garage until I'd found this apartment. 2 months later, my personal articles arrived from California. Video games filled half of one of my 6 cardboard boxes. Between 2017 and today, despite spending the better part of 3 years working at a job where I played a new, free video game every day, despite the publishers who put out the most games refusing to send digital codes and insisting on sending physical copies of their biggest limited editions, I have somehow arrived at the present moment with a video game collection that occupies 2/3 of one Sterilite brand plastic storage tub from Target. It's clear with purple handles, it's behind my sofa, and we keep the vacuum cleaner on top of it. I can tell you off the top of my head the contents of that box. Panzer Dragoon, Panzer Dragoon 2, Azel, Panzer Dragoon RPG, Kawaii-ko-chan no This Is Cool, Gaming no Magazine. Dragon Quest V, Tenku no Hanayome, complete in box for the Nintendo Super Famicom. Dragon Quest V, Tenku no Hanayome for the Sony PlayStation 2. Dragon Quest V, Tenku no Hanayome for Nintendo DS. Dragon Quest V, Hand of the Heavenly Bride for Nintendo DS. Dragon Quest VIII, Sora to Umi to Daichi to Norowareshi Himegimi for the Sony PlayStation 2. Dragon Quest Shounen Yangasu to Fushigi no Dungeon for the Sony PlayStation 2. God Hand. Dragon Quest XI Sugisarishi Tokyo Motomete for Nintendo 3DS. Dragon Quest XI Sugisarishi Tokyo Motomete for Sony PlayStation 4. Berserku Sennen Teikoku no Takahen Seimasen ki no Shou. Super Mario Bros. 3, complete in box for the Nintendo Famicom. Secret of Evermore, complete in box for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Garoden Break Blow, Fist or Twist. Slime Mori Mori Dragon Quest 1 for the Game Boy Advance, 2 for the Nintendo DS, and 3 for the Nintendo 3DS. Sarugetsu 3, or Ape Escape 3, for the Sony PlayStation 2. 24, The Game, for the Sony PlayStation 2. Berwick Saga. Wild Arms 5, The Veeth Vanguard. It says Veeth. You see that? Veeth. VTH. A copy of Landstalker for the Sega Mega Drive signed by designer-director Kan Naito. All 4 volumes of the original Doom novel series by David Abhue, loaned to me by my good friend and action button partner, Brent Porter. Breath of Fire 5, Dragon Quarter. Sopranos, Road to Respect. Dragon Quest 1, 2, and 3 for the Nintendo Famicom, Dragon Quest 1 and 2 and Dragon Quest 3 for the Nintendo Super Famicom, The Nightmare of Druaga Mystery Dungeon, Chronicles of Dungeon Maker 1 and 2 for the Sony PlayStation Portable. For those about to say, what about my English copy of Lost Odyssey inside of a Japanese case for Lost Odyssey? I do have a small shelf under my television with a couple video games on it. I keep it on there. Phantasy Star 2 for the Sega Mega Drive, though admittedly just for the Japanese box art. Shining and the Darkness and Shining Force 2 for the Sega Mega Drive. Kokaku Kidotai Standalone Complex for the Sony PlayStation 2. A Japanese copy of Psyops The Mindgate Conspiracy for the Sony PlayStation 2. Persona 5, 2 copies of Dragon Quest XI Echoes of an Elusive Age for the Sony PlayStation 4, Final Fantasy 15, Final Fantasy 12, Zodiac Age, and The Last of Us Remastered for the Sony PlayStation 4. Those last 6 games I got for free. I paid for the rest. I'll admit, I get rid of a lot of the physical video games I get for free. I know that as per the non-disclosure agreements I sign, I'm not exactly supposed to throw away free video games, lest some imaginary non-credentialed dumpster diver chance upon a rollicking good time, though I genuinely don't like having stuff in my house. In fact, I have in the past and recently, so as to simultaneously satisfy my minimalistic urges while obeying NDAs to the letter, transformed several Blu-ray discs at once into dust with a hammer. I didn't get rid of Persona 5, either of the 2 English copies of Dragon Quest XI, or of Final Fantasy 15 and Final Fantasy 12 Zodiac Age for the PlayStation 4 because I like those games, and I like their boxes. 3 of those are steelbook cases. 2 of those steelbook cases have original Yoshitaka Amano art on them. And you cannot throw Yoshitaka Amano art in the trash, even if you melt it down first in a cast iron skillet on the stove, which I believe is most publishers' NDA-specified method for properly disposing of a steelbook case. I also need to point out real quick that the purple-handled Sterilite brand storage tub from Target under my vacuum cleaner also contains a FedEx envelope containing a handwritten note from Yuji Horii as thanks from Square Enix for my Dragon Quest XI video review, in addition to 4 more curious items. A Jurassic Park coloring book, a poster of Jim Lee's cover art for the Blizzard game Blackthorn from an issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly, a laminated advertisement for the Capcom NES game codename Viper, and an unopened iron-on image of the North American cover art for Super Mario Bros. 3. These 4 items were all birthday presents from none other than the Video Game History Foundation's founder and insert credit podcast weekly panelist, Frank Cifaldi. That guy knows how to give a birthday present that quote-unquote sparks joy. Frank, if you're watching, I'm still looking for the right t-shirt. And one of these days I will Google framing shops in my neighborhood for that Blackthorn poster. Probably after I move, the week after uploading this video. I look forward to being probably the only resident of Upper West Side Manhattan with a Blackthorn poster on their living room wall. There's probably some other stuff in there too, okay? We don't have to, like this sealed DVD of Bloodsport 4 starring Daniel Bernhardt. I will never open this, because I already own it on iTunes. I will keep this DVD, and I will keep it sealed until the day I die. That's a guarantee. We don't have to talk about all of it. I only still possess The Last of Us Remastered because Delicious McCune gave it back when he beat it. Delicious McCune did not give back my copy of The Last of Us for PlayStation 3 or my copy of Uncharted 4: A Thief's End for PlayStation 4. So that's why I don't have The Last of Us for PlayStation 3 or Uncharted 4: A Thief's End for PlayStation 4 in the Sterilite brand purple-handled plastic storage tub from Target, 2/3 full of video games beneath my vacuum cleaner. Let me make you a promise. I will never throw away or otherwise purposely get rid of a Naughty Dog video game. Having said that, The Last of Us Remastered is somehow the only Naughty Dog game I currently own. Let me tell you why I will never throw away or otherwise purposely get rid of a Naughty Dog video game. Because I would personally consider it apocalyptically bad luck. I can't prove that anyone at Naughty Dog likes me, though I can say this. I have never paid for a Naughty Dog video game. I found Rings of Power for Sega Genesis in my school bathroom. It was by the sink. I played my dorm neighbors' copies of Crash Bandicoot 1 and 2. A guy I worked with at the Software Etc. at College Mall in Bloomington, Indiana in 1999 gave me Way of the Warrior for 3DO, and I didn't even have a 3DO. In 2003, I wrote a scathing dissection of the Jack 2 demo disc for the website insertcredit.com, which somehow instigated a chain reaction leading to Naughty Dog to this day sending me every game they ever make for free. My name got on a list, and I think it's still on that list. So while I can't say I have quote-unquote friends at Naughty Dog, I can say that Naughty Dog does send me a Christmas card every year. They even sent me Christmas cards when I lived in Japan. So now that I've dug the chasm, let's leap the logic. Listen, I feel that it's partially my fault that The Last of Us exists exactly the way it does. I'm not saying I deserve credit for any specific percentage of its awards or accolades. I'm just saying that for a period of a few years, I experimentally pontificated about several Spartan video game design principles on a website of decent traffic, actionbutton.net. At one point, in a blend of textual performance art and genuine critical curiosity whose lines' blurriness continues to confound me even today, I composed what I jokingly and then unfortunately seriously named the actionbutton.net manifesto. This supposed ranked list of the 25 quote-unquote best games of all time served foremost as an opportunity for me to write reams of unfettered positivity onto my website that had become mildly known for critical snippiness, while simultaneously sketching the bones of a quote-unquote perfect game within the paragraphs of each tempestuous 5,000-word review. All the meanwhile, I readied my secret weapon. That this list counted down to none other than a reveal that number 1 was not Metal Gear Solid 4. Once the aftertaste of the joke had washed away, I revealed that the only video game which fit all of the skeletal criteria sketched across that hideous novel-length tapestry of typing was none other than Out of This World, known in Europe as Another World, and in Japan as Outer World. Over 1 million people clicked on my review of Out of This World. Most of them immediately clicked away, though the game's creator himself, Eric Chahi, did not. He sent me a beautiful email. I'd frame that email if I knew a good framing shop. I later spent an afternoon with Eric Chahi in San Francisco. We discussed many topics. You may have noticed, for example, that Eric Chahi's name alone makes up the special thanks section of Action Button Entertainment's Video Balls credits. This is perhaps why Eric Chahi's is one of the 6 business cards I carry in my passport case every time I travel internationally. We can talk about the other 5 some other time. Maybe at this point you want to ask what all this has to do with The Last of Us. Sort of a lot. It's like this. The ActionButton.net manifesto tumbled out of my idiot skull in parallel with the most personally frustrating professional exercise I had ever yet endured as of my late 20s. At the time the ActionButton.net manifesto project occurred to me as an idea, I was in the middle of working on a game that was to be published by Electronic Arts. EA was, at this time, branching out with a program they called EA Partners. Their plan was to make a bunch of new, big-budget, single-player, awards-baity action game intellectual properties. Maybe you played Mirror's Edge, or Dante's Inferno, or Dead Space. Every time the EA producers came to our office, which required them to fly to Japan, by the way, they showed us the enviable progress the developers of Dead Space were making. We were really excited to work with the kind of budget they were offering us. I remember one producer saying during a follow-up meeting after the EA boys were on their way back to the airport that, and I quote,
"We could make a Zelda with this money."
and then another guy said, "Forget Zelda. Let's make something
Beautiful.
To this day, I can hear his voice. I recall his exact phrasing. Zelda wa Zelda da kedo, utsukushii game tsukuranai ka? And that man went on to make The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild Game of the Year 2017. That's not true. After that meeting, people in my office kept mentioning Ico and Shadow of the Colossus. Somewhere during this, Metal Gear Solid 4 came out. The artistic aspirational zeitgeist of my professional environment bled into my hobby. And yes, I realize my hobby as a game developer was snippily reviewing video games on a purposely ugly website. We can talk about the psychiatric ramifications of that later. Suffice it to say, the ActionButton.net manifesto presented such strict, dogmatic criteria for a quote-unquote perfect video game because I was, at the time, professionally trying to figure out what exactly perfect meant in the context of a bank transfer in an undisclosable dollar amount. Both of our game's co-producers, Resident Evil and God Hand's Shinji Mikami and No More Heroes and Killer 7's Goichi Suda, had never failed to call Out of This World the best game of all time whenever an interviewer asked that particular mundane question. Other designers I admired, such as Iko's Fumito Ueda and Moon Remix RPG Adventure Chulip and Rule of Roses Yoshiro Kimura, spoke the same opinion. So did a designer I wanted to admire. Myself. Perfunctorily, Out of This World arrived as the obvious thunderclap that concluded the ActionButton.net manifesto. If you'd been following the list closely as I unveiled the reviews over the course of a month, you knew it couldn't possibly have been any other game. The gesture out of the bag, my readership moved on. My life flowed on. When I consider the ensuing decade, my memory forks. On the one hand, my life became trash. If I push out thoughts of that trash, I can sketch a pleasant trail of friendly letters and enthusiastic handshakes. Many AAA video game designers corresponded with me via email and greeted me in person at events such as the Game Developers Conference. For a while, I basked appreciatively and professionally needfully in many offers to have persons more intelligent and accomplished than myself buy me lunch. Many of them told me generally the same thing, that they'd read Action Button, and that I'd changed the way they think about such and such granular element of game design. It was always a slightly different granular element of game design. Eventually, they all brought up Out of This World. The truth is, I peaked as a designer when I cracked the Out of This World code for an audience of over 1 million people, most of whom didn't read past the first paragraph. If they had read past the first paragraph, they'd have seen a phrase whose drum I had banged elsewhere throughout the ActionButton.net manifesto. Internal consistency. Out of This World presents us a holistic video game which marries cinematic aspirations to game design, to level design in a perfect polygamous triangle. Out of This World showed the world how far a game could get on the fumes of one man alone, if it ran with the maxim of truth to itself. I perpetrated no act of talent in spelling out the perfect video game. I was just saying what a lot of designers at the time were probably thinking. I said it because I didn't see anyone else saying it, and I figured if I said it first, a lot of people would pay attention to me. I didn't have money, so I took what I could get. With my declaration of Out of This World as the best game of all time by a labyrinthine set of hyper-strict and quite frankly unfair criteria, I peaked. I had finally finished dumping my entire circa 2008 game designer brain onto the internet. How far which crows carried its scraps, I cannot prove. However, I can say that The Last of Us represents the exact video game the ActionButton.net manifesto so painstakingly sketched 5 years before its release. And thus, The Last of Us represents the first and last video game that my admittedly limited imagination will perhaps ever perfectly understand. Any designer with or without formal training could therefore have designed The Last of Us in their head or on paper as far back as 2008. Naughty Dog's miracle was just such that they took this idealized notion of a perfect game and dedicated themselves to the years of daily work it took to make it. I won't say that The Last of Us is exactly the same game as Out of This World, though I will say that it does feature a guy escaping from a submerged underwater car at one point. Out of This World begins with the player swimming up out of water. The first zombie kill in The Last of Us happens in third person, just like the monster kill in Out of This World. In The Last of Us, the first action we perform when in control of our avatar Joel is kicking our way out of a car via repeated button presses, just like how in Out of This World, we shake our way out of a cage. Out of This World has a climactic scene where the player character must cinematically crawl toward a weapon that will kill their enemy. And The Last of Us also contains a scene where the player character must crawl toward a weapon that will kill their enemy. The Last of Us is about a big guy with a small buddy, and so is Out of This World. Out of This World opens with an authority figure firearmedly betraying our suspicion of their friendliness. And so does The Last of Us. So I'm not saying Out of This World and The Last of Us are the exact same game or anything. I'm just saying the parallels are there, and they are huge. Anyway, look, you don't have to take my word for it. I mean, to be honest, I don't even take my word for it. If you've never played The Last of Us and you think it's, quote, just a zombie game, unquote, what you're doing right there is judging a book by its cover. And you know what they say about judging a book by its cover? They say, don't do that. Besides, The Last of Us doesn't even have a zombie on the cover. I mean, if you really wanted to judge The Last of Us by its cover, you'd call it a teenage sniper girl game. However, you can judge a cover as a cover. And how the holy heck are you going to argue with The Last of Us Remastered's up-top graphic-designed proud declaration of over 200 Game of the Year awards? That's at least 201 Game of the Year awards. If you come up to me and you tell me that you just won 200 Game of the Year awards, I'm gonna call a doctor for you. I mean, 1 Game of the Year award? Call your mom. 10 Game of the Year awards? Call your mom twice. 200 Game of the Year awards, though? Buddy, you might as well just die. So why did The Last of Us win over 200 Game of the Year awards?
Actually,
Before we talk about that, let's get serious. Did The Last of Us actually win over 200 Game of the Year awards? How many Game of the Year awards are there? Like 1,000? I checked during the process of writing this script I am currently reading off my brand new teleprompter paid for by generous backers of patreon.com/actionbutton. And it turns out you don't need any kind of license to give out a Game of the Year award. Me and Action Button researcher Alex Jaffe did a little internet spelunking in search of at least 201 Game of the Year awards for The Last of Us. We ended up, well, almost immediately finding goatypicks.blogspot.com, which reports that The Last of Us in fact won 231 Game of the Year awards, making it the most awarded game in history. In fact, if there's 231 on this list, chances are there are at least 231 more out there. Maybe some of the award givers sent their awards to Naughty Dog in an email or tucked into a Christmas card. Actually, this gives me an idea. Starting this year, I will commission an illustrator to design a non-denominational holiday card themed around Action Button's choice for Game of the Year. I will not publicize this card. I won't even announce my choice of the Game of the Year on Twitter. I'll simply send this card directly to the Game of the Year's director. If the director chooses to publicize the card, they may. Again, I won't publicize my choice of Game of the Year. Having said that, if anyone from CD Projekt Red is watching this video, my business inquiries email address is prominently featured in my Twitter profile. So let's return to the more interesting question. Why did The Last of Us win, quote, over 200 Game of the Year awards, unquote? What makes The Last of Us the most awarded game in history? Doesn't this distinction alone make it worthy of an Action Button review? I'm being serious here. I really do think this is a spectacularly good reason to review this particular game for this series. So, why did The Last of Us win more awards than any other game in history? Why did it somehow lose the Spike VGX Award for 2013 Game of the Year? And more importantly, why would it definitely win Game of the Year at the Game Awards if it were released in 2020? To answer these questions, I could read all the individual reviews of all the major mainstream publications that awarded The Last of Us Game of the Year in 2013, and I have, though I promise I didn't do that until after I wrote all of this review. Before I went ahead and read all the individual reviews on all the major mainstream publications that went on to award The Last of Us Game of the Year for 2013, I typed up the following list of ingredients for video game Oscar bait. After reading all the individual reviews on all the major mainstream publications that went on to award The Last of Us Game of the Year for 2013, I realized all my predictions had been correct. So I didn't need to edit this section. Video game Oscar bait. Review symptom number 1. References to movies or books that won awards 5 or so years before the game was released. In the case of The Last of Us, those films would be Children of Men, The Road, and No Country for Old Men. And those books would be Cormac McCarthy's The Road. It's actually just one book. I've found that it generally takes video game developers 5 years to transform inspiration from a film into coherent game design. A side note, I actually didn't see any reviews for major mainstream media outlets that went on to award The Last of Us Game of the Year 2013 mention No Country for Old Men even once. Which is weird because there's a whole lot of Josh Brolin's Llewellyn Moss all over Troy Baker's Joel. It ends with that snap to black after a character speaks a very short sentence. Come on, there's a lot of parallels there. Video game Oscar bait. Review symptom number 2. Allusions to the violence as uncomfortable. Critics love calling violence in violent video games uncomfortable. Critics love insinuating that the game is trying to make you feel uncomfortable to prove some kind of cosmic point. Let's face it, discomfort is a shortcut to making violence meaningful, just like an apocalypse is a shortcut for level design. It's not the writers who like writing about post-apocalypses. It's the level designers who now have a quote-unquote world-building excuse for all the furniture in the world to have fallen over before the player shows up. The thing is, if you drench a game enough in this kind of world-building, if you commit to really owning it the way The Last of Us does, you got yourself a firecracker. Video game Oscar bait. Review symptom number 3. Absolute awe at the aplomb with which Naughty Dog painted the portrait of a burgeoning friend relationship between an old sad dad and a girl who both reminds him of his dead daughter and doesn't. This is anecdotal, though all of the game critics I knew personally circa 2013 had either had a child or seriously thought about having one, or they'd at least gotten married. I had not done the first one, had done the second one, and just barely did not do the third one. Nintendogs got a 40 out of 40 from Famitsu in 2005 so that The Last of Us could win over 200 Game of the Year awards in 2013. I have this sentence in my script here, and there's no period on it. It's like, I suppose I left an unfinished thought in there. I'm not 100% sure what I was going to try to say. Though you know what? I'm leaving it. Video game Oscar bait review symptom number 4. Bursting appreciation of the idea of a complex female character in a video game. Ellie is not a princess you have to save. In fact, she saves you several times. At the time The Last of Us came out, I don't think we had ever had a female video game character as complex as Ellie, or at least as interesting in anywhere near quite the same way. I'm being subjective here, I know, though I promise I racked my brain before writing that sentence. Though on a more objective note, young, human, teenage girls possessing names, voiced dialogue, gameplay agency, unique gameplay mechanics, and literary complexity in a believably realistic story set on planet Earth did not actually exist as a thing prior to The Last of Us. I realize I put a lot of qualifiers on that sentence, though hopefully over the course of the rest of this video, I'm going to show you so many numbers that you'll trust me about so many things that you'll loop back around to trusting me about this one as well. Video game Oscar bait review symptom number 5. Dissection of the combat encounter design as requiring improvisational weaving together of stealth, gun shooting, and item crafting in moment-to-moment doses, and encouragement of long-term planning due to item scarcity. Video game Oscar bait review symptom number 6. Absolute awe at the environment design, particularly stressing the explosiveness of the game's opening segment. The Last of Us predates saturatedly frequent critical usage of the word prestige to describe either a television series or a big-budget video game. Some of The Last of Us's most wowing portions consist of combatless, violence unobstructed mere traversal. An injection of this flavor now and again in an action video game early in the 2010s always earned accolades. Today, in 2020, I tend to call this sort of moment in a game a prestige tour. The Last of Us employed them masterfully, and their use probably contributed to the overall fruitfulness of The Last of Us's awards haul. Game critics in 2013, unlike me in 2020, did not possess knowledge of the next 7 years of video games, so I, today, have a couple other theories about why The Last of Us conquered the idea of Game of the Year awards quite so sweepingly. First of all, its release window. On the micro scale, The Last of Us came out in June of 2013. Unlike with films, the games that win the most awards tend to come out during the first half of a year. Games take a long time to play. Critics have better memories of games they finished. Critics play a lot of games. Critics have to finish every game they review. Critics don't review every game. Critics don't always have time to play the games they want to play. Critics don't get to finish every game they want to play. I've proven this elsewhere with statistics. The second half of the year is when you release a film you want to win awards. The first half of the year is when you release a game of the year contender. My second theory as to why The Last of Us won so many Game of the Year awards in 2013, its release window. On the macro scale, The Last of Us came out at the end of the PlayStation 3 era, just 5 months before the launch of the PlayStation 4. Naughty Dog has always insisted on displaying complete ownership of the technical aspect of video game presentation. Naughty Dog masters Sony hardware faster than any other developer. They made Uncharted 1 at the beginning of the PlayStation 3's life cycle. By the end of the PlayStation 3's life cycle, their power was unstoppable. The Last of Us arrived looking, as I recall several people saying on Twitter, like a next-gen game. It looked so much like a next-gen game, in fact, that they remastered it for the PlayStation 4 just a year later. They probably did this because you couldn't play PlayStation 3 games on the PlayStation 4, and they wanted to make the recuperationally correct amount of money proportional to their massive development effort. Man, what about all those PlayStation 3 games that didn't get remastered, huh? Also, game critics love nostalgia almost more than they love video games. The PlayStation 4 came out in November of 2013, and the critical establishment at large was in a mood to look back fondly at the entire PlayStation 3. What better game to salute the entire console's memory than one by its prodigal developer? Here, in The Last of Us was a game emblematic of its hardware. Think about it. How many games from the beginning of the PlayStation 3's life cycle would you want to be remade for the PlayStation 4? Heck, how many games from the beginning of the PlayStation 4 would you even want to play on the PlayStation 5 at all? I mean, aside from Knack and Resogun. Reason number 3 that I, today, in 2020, suspect that The Last of Us in 2013 won quite so many Game of the Year awards. The Last of Us was politically simple. The Last of Us portrays a believably bleak, yet comfortably fictional near future in which humans cower in militarized quarantine zones, squabbling over basic necessities during a deadly pandemic that requires all persons to bring gas masks on any expedition outdoors. Rather than burrow into logistics and pontificate on politics, The Last of Us drops us into its world as it happens to happen, and walks us through a corporeal struggle in which we manipulate a man possessing sadness of an apolitical human variety. You can celebrate The Last of Us for its quote-unquote uncomfortable violence, or you can boast about how that quote-unquote uncomfortable violence
Didn't bother me.
I mean, ultimately, The Last of Us does ask a couple of uncomfortable questions, the ethical gravity of which you'd have to be a freak to deny. What can I say? We got freaks in this world. The Last of Us gives us hyper-relatable characters, allows us to spectate a superlatively believable relationship, and hits us with an emotional cliffhanger of an ending. Reasons I think The Last of Us won so many Game of the Year awards. Number 4. The Last of Us makes its players think about level design in a way few 3D games yet had as of 2013. The Last of Us's simple, instantly graspable aha situations elevated level design geometry to equivalent status with fancy graphics. You didn't have to be a hardcore game player in 2013 to look at any of The Last of Us's combat set pieces and have a critical coin flip thought about opponent behavior and level pathways. Factors I in 2020 realize contributed to The Last of Us winning over 200 Game of the Year awards in 2013, making it the most awarded game in history. Number 5. Its only competition was Bioshock Infinite. Reasons I in 2020 think that The Last of Us in 2013 won so many Game of the Year awards. Number 6. The Last of Us presented a meticulously planned, rigorously fine-tuned intertwining of game design and narrative. One of my viewers who messaged me on Twitter to express concern about my doing an action button review of The Last of Us called the game an interactive movie. This person also pointed out that they had not played the game. Friend, I told you I'd answer your question in the video, so here it is. No, The Last of Us is much, much more than an interactive movie. In fact, I plan to dedicate the rest of this review to exploring exactly how seamlessly and magically The Last of Us combines narrative design and game design. Anyway, even though The Last of Us won fewer than 300 Game of the Year awards, I think it's safe to say that the game's lasting legacy warrants at least a couple dozen honorary GOTYs between 2014 and now. For example, God of War 2018 owes The Last of Us at least 11% of its GOTYs for its pioneerish blueprinting of the Babychild-Bigfriend situation alone. And yes, I know that Bioshock Infinite also technically presents a Babychild-Bigfriend situation and also stars Troy Baker as Daddy. On the other hand, Bioshock Infinite isn't good. With that, let us begin the Action Button Review, Remastered, of The Last of Us. The Last of Us presents multiple riddles to a critic in 2020. How do we review a video game that likely resulted from the ether of reviews themselves? When I review The Last of Us, I wrestle with the dogmatic declarations of my past, with the game's historical impact, and with the established idea of AAA prestige interactive electronic entertainment. I've decided the best tactic is to speak about The Last of Us freshly. My primary concern is takeaways. From The Last of Us, we can take away several lessons that allow us to better understand the aspirations of present-day video games. Though most of these lessons also give us exciting windows into the greatness of past games as well. A cynic might conclude that The Last of Us results from Naughty Dog's directors asking themselves, "What if Nathan Drake were real?" And then immediately answering that question with, instead of climbing sheer rock walls, he'd have to hunt for ladders in tall grass. This theory doesn't strike me personally as impossibly far off. The pursuit of quote-unquote realism and groundedness in fiction that had entered the zeitgeist as of 2005's film Batman Begins had, at the time of the beginning of The Last of Us's development, begun to infect video games as well. Though at a glance in 2020, The Last of Us and Uncharted feel like two absolutely different flavors of video game, I replayed portions of the first two Uncharted games for the purpose of this review and was able to find more universally applicable game design overlap than even I had anticipated. The Last of Us is very much a game by the makers of Uncharted, much like Uncharted was very much a game by the makers of Jak 2. Tracing a path from Jak 2 to Uncharted to The Last of Us, we can sketch Naughty Dog's creative exploration expedition in search of a game as a holistic experience. The Last of Us is that long expedition's ultimate fruit, an internally consistent fusion of persistent narrative and game-playing experiences orbiting around a core pillar of improvisational possibility spaces. The Last of Us presents us dozens of story-heavy problem-solving set pieces which we negotiate through our own uniquely improvised blends of strategy and action, using weapons, stealth, traps, and misdirection in any of 100 slightly different combinations per problem as the level design geometry, the enemies' positions, and our persistent supply of scarce resources allows. Criticism often mimics the structure of the criticized work, and so we can dissect The Last of Us's pristine examples of gameliness using any of 100 possible paths through the same destinations. In the interest of simplicity and brevity, I have identified 3 cornerstonely keywords for my analysis of The Last of Us. I will address each of these keywords in a separate chapter of this video. Each of these keywords offers us a different opportunity to assess The Last of Us as a whole. The keywords I have identified are cohesiveness, replayability, and minimalism. To use a rock climbing analogy for some reason, when faced with such a massive obstacle, one first needs to identify the nearest handhold. To borrow an old jeweler's metaphor, only a diamond can cut a diamond. And in order to cut a diamond into the shape of a tool one can use to cut another diamond, one needs a diamond of the proper shape for shaping another diamond into the shape of a diamond-cutting tool. In other words, before I could begin to assess The Last of Us through the lens of each of the keywords I located, I needed to identify the single element of the game that can cut the diamond. For a game as cohesive and consistent and true to itself as The Last of Us, identifying this element was a matter of objective analysis. I won't bore you with the details of the analysis process. I'll just say I have decided that the most important element of The Last of Us is, without a doubt, item scarcity. So, from the handhold of item scarcity, I shall cut the diamond of The Last of Us into 3 slightly similarly shaped reviews. Somewhere during these 3 reviews, we'll get to the point. And following these 3 reviews, as always, is the bottom line. Cohesiveness defines The Last of Us. In The Last of Us, a mutated strain of the cordyceps fungus has transformed much of the human race into homicidal mushroom zombies. At least millions, maybe billions, have either died or succumbed to infection. The remainers hunker and squabble in dilapidated cities and political misery. They cling to each other, and they sometimes hate each other. Many clinging quibblers are old enough to remember materialism. Even as they scrape to survive, they argue over goods and luxuries, maybe just to remember wanting something. So in addition to turning people into zombies, the fungus has also turned Earth into a prison. Therefore, from a menu at almost any point in The Last of Us's playing time, you, the player, can craft an improvised impaling implement, aka a quote-unquote shiv in prison parlance, if you have in your possession a blade and some tape. You can use a shiv to silently and immediately kill any enemy if you catch them unaware. If one of the clickers, the most violent and deadly variety of infected monster, touches you, it's an instant game over. Unless you have a shiv, in which case you can repel the attack, eliminate the monster, and continue to live. Yet using a shiv means losing a shiv. Like so many other prison murder weapons, shivs break after one use. They're business ends snapped off and embedded in a carcass, dropped forever at the scene of the kill. You can find a shiv's ingredients, blades and tape, in addition to rags, alcohol, explosives, and sugar, by searching dressers, lockers, shelves, boxes, floors, bushes, piles, and heaps among the debris and detritus of the late civilization. The Last of Us drops us into a dilapidated world as shredded like pulled pork as its protagonist's self-esteem. Upon entering any given growtified, water-damaged, holy-walled, blown-apart building, our father, Joel, ceremonially utters to any listening companion, "See if there's anything we can use." Not one character in The Last of Us turns to face the camera and says to the player,
"Get used to this."
We solve puzzle number 1 in The Last of Us without noticing it. Early at Joel's friend Tess's behest, we scrounge an empty dwelling. Maybe after that, we fight a battle during which we lose a consumable. Maybe after that, we fight a battle during which we lack a consumable. Maybe we struggle hard and long and obtain a result that feels as much like a mistake as it does a victory. Maybe next time Joel says,
"See if there's anything we can use."
we scrounge harder. To use a shiv is to lose a shiv, and to lose a shiv is to need another shiv. So to consider shiving is to weigh one's personal backpack economics. To consider shiving is to reflect on scrounging. Your brain wordlessly says to you, I once and recently scrounged the blades and bindings needed to craft this shiv. It stands to reason when this current nightmare has abated, I might again scrounge the blades and bindings needed to craft this shiv's replacement. Thus and so, The Last of Us works its most elegant trick. We need supplies to craft. We need the products of crafting in order to solve situations in ways that feel correct. We need to scrounge during downtime to acquire supplies. Within a maximum of 3 core loops of scrounge, fight, scrounge, The Last of Us has subliminally persuaded everyone except born haters to roleplay its protagonist. Game design, graphics, level design, geometry, and voice-acted banter have conspired to materialize a daddy-shaped spiritual Halloween costume around our minds. Cohesiveness defines The Last of Us. Every system is one system. Every aspect is one aspect. The Last of Us begins simply and moves simply. Each moment serves every other moment. The Last of Us feels born of meditative conviction to a mission of mechanical truth. In the name of accessibility, The Last of Us compromises quote-unquote realism with the exact calculated minimum amount of video game-like design required to facilitate the player's role-playing without sacrificing crypticism. Witness the yellow shading that indicates the player's next objective: To The Last of Us's holistically interested creatives, a minimap would quote-unquote break immersion. Yet a player screaming in frustration after being lost in a level design labyrinth would break immersion even more. So the designers begin by hanging limp, flappy, yellow danger tape from seemingly inconsequential poles and ledges. In 2013, as in 2020, exuberant cloth physics draw the game liker's eye. As the game grows late, the shade fades. Witness this here end-time yellow paint. Likewise, a radar a la Metal Gear Solid would quote-unquote break immersion. Heeding the cries of every then-day's blogger who boasted that they turned the user interface completely off in Assassin's Creed, The Last of Us's makers made threat detection a part of its palpable world. By holding your PlayStation 3 trigger, or your PlayStation 4 bumper, or your Scuff Vantage 2 rear right paddle, you can make Joel listen. You can see what he hears. This synesthesia doesn't shatter naturalism so much as it meets naturalism at a point likewise equidistant to video game. We can't literally occupy this man's shoes or his ears. We are doing the best our brain can, given the screen barrier. To gift us the visualized fruit of the fictional man's hearing, the video game has condescended halfway to beef the one of our senses indicated in the name of its entertainment category. Here, too, The Last of Us's designers have chosen what, upon scrutinizing analysis, I have determined represents the only objectively correct solution to this particular design situation. Strict, though not in excess. Realistic enough not to break immersion. Game designerly enough to feel quote-unquote fun. This defines the behavior of a mainstream media Game of the Year award winner. To heal, we must first craft. We might cower in some dingy back room while yelling infected sufferers kick too much in the halls all around us. We find a rag and some alcohol. We can use these same exact ingredients to make a first aid kit or a Molotov cocktail, presenting us two differently valuable craftable tools that require the exact same ingredients encourages us to hold on to the ingredients and craft when at last we know our needs. Live on one fist, kill on the other. Subtly, the game encourages us to either risk playing a psychological guessing game with ourselves an hour in advance of our needs, or craft these particular items in the middles of battles. So often in The Last of Us, we end up breathing in tandem with our daddy mans while he hunkers and crafts. Then we must endure the sometimes seemingly glacial timing necessary to apply the crafted bandage. When we die a minute later, we think maybe it would have been a better idea to burn all these freaks with a firebomb hurled from the shadows, instead of leaving those shadows to meet those freaks face to face. Joel is a real regular man with a real regular backpack. Joel is not a cop. He does not have holsters. If you want holsters for Joel, you have to make them with scavenged parts collected slowly during world-builderly scrounges. You might find yourself expending the last round of a pistol's ammunition while hunkering in a hidey hole dangerously proximal to some fear-crazed human freak who'd prefer your blood make itself visible. You have a different pistol with different ammunition in your backpack. You can get it out. However, it takes a few breathless seconds to get it out. Here we see it again. Strict, though not unto excess. Realistic enough not to break immersion. Game designerly enough to feel fun. Done too unpretentiously to warrant, for example, a blog post about its kooky innovativeness, yet working in concert with every other design decision and presentation element toward the common goal of winning over 200 Game of the Year awards. Someone at Naughty Dog must have knelt to rummage in a rucksack for perhaps a passport while in line at an airport ticket counter and thought, "Hey, this is an interesting conflict." Then, thanks to the meditative creative guiding principle of restraint, Their co-workers did not let them make the jacket inventory interface from Atari's 2008 Alone in the Dark reboot. Over all this, we have trinkets. The Last of Us's trinkets make sense. Our regular real dude's regular real rucksack can only hold so much. 20 years ago, the world ate most of itself in a night and took this man's patience with it. This man's materialism looks like a pencil nub right about now. When Joel says,
"See if there's anything we can use,"
our interior armchair game designer does not even flinch at the glints with which the game demonstrates the positions of parts, blades, rags, alcohol, explosives, and sugar. 20 years spent hunkering in shocking fear will give a man a figurative heads-up display when it comes time for dumpster diving. The Last of Us generously patronizes us players with a literal heads-up display. Between big fights and little skirmishes, we walk a road through a crumbled world nature is working hard to reclaim. I've seen a lot of people call The Last of Us a survival horror game, though I wouldn't call it that. I wouldn't even call it a horror game, even though it's got monsters, even though it's got nauseating moments of violence, and even though we see Joel touch the bottom of someone's shoe 12 times, yet we never see him wash his hands. I think The Last of Us is better than a quote-unquote horror game. I could argue this point for several hours, though that would get extremely boring. So I'll just say this. I think that in order to actually qualify as a horror game, The Last of Us would need to pepper its materials scrounging sessions with more jump scares. Only 3 times during the entire game do we have to contend with a monster during a dedicated scrounging session. 2 of those 3 times occur during the same early chapter, Billstown. Most of the rest of the time, The Last of Us leaves us ponderously alone with our principal characters as they delve and rummage the already ransacked dwellings of the departed. We hear them banter as they do so. Should we inquire deeply enough of The Last of Us, we'll perform this banter-speckled rummaging in character, thinking about the future clicker we might kill with a shiv crafted out of the blade we found on a kitchen countertop. Moments before Ellie expressed disbelief at the concept of an ice cream truck. Some of the best trinket scrounging excursions yank us far from the path of the main narrative. At points in its campaign, The Last of Us offers the role-playingly inquisitive player opportunities to obtain massively invaluable and dreadfully rare permanent upgrade items such as supplements and tools. One of my favorite scrounging excursions occurs late in the game. On this excursion, Joel can find the monstrously powerful weapon, the flamethrower, reasonably far in advance of its mandatory placement in the story. We can only find it if we jump off of the horse that we are sharing with Ellie and enter a suspicious building alone. By this point in the story, Joel has begun to trust Ellie to watch his back when he's not watching hers. In a role-playingly daddish state of mind, we might think,
"Ellie can wait here on the horse. She can handle herself."
We spend minutes scavenging supplies. We find the flamethrower, and even while we're in here, we see evidence of the people who were here before us. The game's artists blessed even these quiet, optional moments with extra imaginative world building. A person lived here. A person was comfortable here. They have gone now, and I found blades and alcohol they didn't or couldn't take with them wherever they went. No freak here jumps to scare us. We are alone with our thoughts about the past story of this world, the present state of our item inventory, and the possible violence of our futures. So yeah, suffice it to say, I would not quite call this survival horror. I'd call it cinematic authored survival action. Minimalism defines The Last of Us. Small integers sketch the psychology of this world. Joel is a regular, real dude with a regular, real rucksack. He's only looking for 5 types of thing. He can only carry 3 of each, and he can use these 3 things to make 6 types of item, which require 1 of each of 2 of the 5 things he collects. In every action conflict, we use an average of 3 of these makeshift crafted tools. Between conflicts, we rummage the late civilization. While our characters' relationship-forgingly banter, we strive to top up our dwindling stock of ingredients. A conflict's trinket expenditures inform the emotions we feel upon locating replacement trinkets in the next scavenging session. If you turn up the difficulty, The Last of Us gives you fewer trinkets. Now you can make fewer valuable tools. Now you feel worse when you break a shiv off in a killer's neck, when you could have instead thought a little harder and negotiated a situation wherein you could have strangled him without anybody else seeing you. Now you feel better when you make another shiv. Later, you look at your stock mid-skirmish and wonder how you're going to solve this problem with so few tools. On easy mode, the integers are small. On grounded, the hardest mode, the integers are much smaller. Shrinking the integers amplifies the psychology, achieving harmonious role-playing. The Last of Us's campaign revels in survival genre mechanics, yet implements them with a board game designerly restraint so perpendicular to other, more procedural, more online competitive survival games that we might as well give it its own genre: cinematic authored survival action. Take melee weapons, for example. Each of the available melee weapons can only kill so many enemies before breaking. Some types of melee weapon can kill more or fewer enemies than others. In the crafting menu, you can enhance your melee weapons' durability by spending crafting ingredients. Thus, every time you come across a melee weapon, you consider the economics of your current melee weapon's durability, your stock of upgrade ingredients, and the durability status of any currently applied melee weapon upgrades versus the base durability of the newfound melee weapon. Though perhaps no one element sums up the board game designerly mission statement of cinematic authored survival as well as The Last of Us's bottles. Strewn littering each of The Last of Us's atmospheric, dilapidated, ramshackle conflict venues, you encounter trash of the late world. With tender, checkers-like minimalism, the game designers left them here for you to pick up, throw from behind cover, and distract one enemy of your choosing, or 2 or 3 enemies if you throw it well. You can only carry 1 noisy bottle or slightly less noisy brick at a time. Thus, in the bones of its spirit, The Last of Us has more in common with a Dungeons & Dragons campaign than it does with Resident Evil. Here in parentheses I have, or you can say it has as much in common with Shining Force 2 as it does with Metal Gear Solid 3. I'm not sure what I meant by that. My favorite example is the tool level. In order to upgrade your guns, you need to find parts, which are plentiful, and tools, of which the game's entire campaign gives you only 5. Finding a tool unlocks higher-level weapon upgrades. The upgrades themselves expend parts. Though The Last of Us's designers had kindness enough to leave the tools in locations amenable to even the amateurish among scroungers, it's possible to miss a tool or 2 along the way and arrive upon the story's final challenges possessing a lackadaisical arsenal. Much more plentiful than tools, yet still wickedly rare in comparison to crafting ingredients, are The Last of Us's supplements. Using these, we can permanently upgrade Joel's various attributes. For example, for 50 supplements, we can permanently upgrade Joel's base health statistic. 50 supplements is a lot, and there are absolutely not nearly enough supplements in the entire game to max out every category. I love this. Again, as Sid Meier once said, and everyone, including me, has paraphrased a billion times, a game is a series of interesting choices. The Last of Us is a game, and The Last of Us is a series of interesting choices. Occasionally, you manipulate Joel through a big, beautiful AAA level design with the end goal being merely a heart-to-heart conversation with your saddened daughter figure, Ellie. Sometimes, the knocked-over furniture in the hallway leading up to said heart-to-heart conversation forebodes a shocking, violent future conflict. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes The Last of Us's artists built this environment simply for two characters to have a talk in. The Last of Us does not waste your time. Any complaint of time wasting is immediately defensible as world building. Conflict-free zones feed the story with dialogue and the future action scenes with crafting supplies. Yet either in an effort to secure over 200 Game of the Year awards or out of the earnest exuberance of top-tier game makers, The Last of Us does indulge in the occasional extravagance. Yet even then, it displays a restraint unheard of among its then-current peers and imitators. The Last of Us features a playable scene in which a character tracks and hunts a deer with a bow and arrow. Yet it features no hunting minigame complete with cookable meat and stockpilable venison. The Last of Us does not even present players a tutorial informing them that they can follow the blood trail on the snow to find the deer. The Last of Us simply expects you to be paying attention. The Last of Us has a horse riding mechanic without a vast open overworld. These varied moments contribute to a brain-pleasing texture of completeness, bigness, and roundness. Most players perceive The Last of Us as a complete game. Many players perceive it as a big one. Yet my recent replay, after not playing the game in 6 years, took me only 13 hours, 46 minutes, 23 seconds, and 17 frames. I should mention that in this playthrough I explored obsessively enough to naturally encounter most of the optional hidden firefly pendants. I should also note that 1 hour, 17 minutes, and 43 seconds of that time I spent theatrically fiddling with menus or standing and staring at walls and such for the purpose of having clean, static B-roll footage for this review. So we're actually looking at a playtime of 12 hours, 28 minutes, and 40 seconds. The Last of Us's creative dedication to minimalism informs this feeling of scale. How many other AAA prestige video games feature cinematic camera cuts to get our main character and his quest-giving big brother outside of a building that the game has already given us the pleasure of walking persistently into? Most AAA games insist on keeping takes long so as to quote-unquote impress the player with the grandiosity and connectedness of their various level segments. Despite its having just theatrically immersed us on a walking and shooting tour through this factory, The Last of Us cuts us outdoors when it needs to, wasting none of our time in these storytelling segments. I'm saying that, for example, if this were a big, huge, luxurious open world game, your brother would be like, "I'll talk to you outside when you're done. Meet me near where we keep the horses." How many other AAA single-player awards-baiting video games own the fiction-writing gumption to present their narratives as a series of short stories? Each chapter of The Last of Us has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Each character we meet inspires growth immediately, intermediately, and long-termly in our principal characters. We bring our macrocosm face to face with many microcosms. How many other AAA single-player awards-baiting video games present us chapters of such irregular length? Seriously, the Pittsburgh chapter alone accounts for 28% of the game's length. That's not quite a third, though it is more than a quarter. How many other AAA single-player awards-baiting action games position slightly expanded regular combat encounters in lieu of boss battles? Actually, I guess Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare 1 kinda made that a thing everybody noticed way back in 2007, huh? How many other AAA single-player awards-baiting action games can you think of that feature exactly one one-on-one boss battle? In The Last of Us, life on planet Earth is a boss battle. How many other AAA single-player awards-baiting action games so purposefully devolve into perfunctory challenges as the narrative crescendos. The Last of Us pays little mind to the conventional action game design idea of steadily increasing difficulty. The Last of Us peppers its plot with situations of naturalistically fluctuating complexity. 2/3 of the way into the game, you might find yourself breezing through multiple encounters in a row. In the name of character development, The Last of Us possesses the cold-blooded, fiction-writing, gumptional, elephant-sized balloon guts necessary to present us situations that Joel and Ellie face with nonchalance. They've been surviving together for almost a year. Why should everything be getting harder for them? Action Button Method patron saint Gordon Ramsay would describe The Last of Us as a simple, local, rustic meal consisting of 4 to 5 flavors on the plate. So let's go ahead and get into The Last of Us's game flavors. Game flavor number 1. Prestige Tour. The Last of Us presents pioneering prestige tours. Released in the same year as Gone Home, which is one entire game-length prestige tour, The Last of Us admittedly slightly less innovatively incorporated conflict-free, pressureless, stressless traversal segments into its action game in a way that has altered the fabric of AAA game design for the better. In fact, The Last of Us actually gives us 3 distinctly different sub-flavors of Prestige Tour. I've already killed one of these sub-flavors' horse, so let me beat it for a second. The mostly optional, scrounging, materials-rummaging moments count as prestige tours, albeit ones more seamlessly integrated into an overarching game design system of systems than we'd actually ever seen in video games at that point. I'd coin them as survival scrounges. The second sub-flavor of prestige tour is puzzle solving. The Last of Us gives us plenty of slow, breathery moments wherein Joel and his buddy or buddies must search their immediate surroundings for a ladder hiding in tall grass or a makeshift raft pallet stuck in an air pocket underwater. Not a single one of these puzzles requires any actual thinking. Universally, the solution is look everywhere it's possible to look. These so-called puzzles possess more or less the challenge level of a hidden object game that your great-uncle still has on his iPhone 4S. Yet their simplicity hides a beautiful purpose. These mechanically simplistic puzzle breathers exist to make you feel fully in charge of a situation for a few busy worky minutes, during which the characters banter and develop. This is ingeniously good design. The third sub-flavor of Prestige Tour is your classic walk-in look. The Last of Us revolutionized this particular form by somewhat blatantly invoking recollections of the virtuoso long takes of Alfonso Cuarón's 2006 film Children of Men. However, Alfonso Cuarón has said that video games such as Half-Life did in fact influence Children of Men, so The Last of Us' borrowing this technique back makes more than perfect sense. As a side note, in the 2 years before The Last of Us came out, every single AAA game designer I knew was flying to New York for a weekend, coming back to California, and raving about Sleep No More. In case you don't know what Sleep No More is, it's perhaps the drama world's most famous example of the immersive theater art form. I don't know for sure, though if one or more Naughty Dog developers were among this zeitgeisty crew of immersive theater goers, I wouldn't be surprised. Shout me out in the comments if you want to see the Action Button review of Sleep No More. Despite living in New York City, I've never been there, and I wouldn't mind having an excuse to go. Lord knows I need an excuse to do literally anything I do these days. Actually, before we move on to the next game flavor, let me talk about these immersive theater segments for a second. If you've been around the internet, you've probably seen people credit The Last of Us with pioneering these segments. However, I've also seen arguments that Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare 1 might have done it first. There's that mission right at the beginning where you're riding in the back of a car and then you realize that you're about to get executed and then you get shot in the face. Remember that? You get shot in the face.
Remember that?
Whatever the case may be, I remember an avalanche of game critics heaping praise on the Himalayan Village segment of Uncharted 2: Among Thieves. 16 chapters into a 26-chapter game, Nathan Drake finds himself in a pinch. He awakens convalescing in a Himalayan village. For a brief, glorious chain of minutes, the player basks in the violenceless atmosphere of this quiet Himalayan community. For the first time in the playable game, we see children and firearmless women. The critical establishment at large lauded Uncharted 2's Himalayan village segment for a small variety of reasons, chiefly because it came after 15 chapters of non-stop over-the-top popcorn pop gun violence, bomb explosions, and building crumblings. Critics called Chapter 16, Where Am I?, aka The Himalayan Village, a breather. I recall someone using the word
masterstroke.
When I first played The Last of Us, I recalled the Himalayan Village almost immediately. Right from its very first playable instant, The Last of Us plays with the form of digital immersive theater. I remember thinking, in 2013, that Naughty Dog had listened to critics. Today, in 2020, I realized that Naughty Dog had actually listened to themselves. In the spirit of investigation, I decided to stream the game Uncharted: Drake's Fortune on a quote-unquote quest to find The Last of Us's DNA. I put on my strongest spectacles and prepared to go 100% Dr. Livingston, I presumptuous, all over Drake's Fortune. Uncharted: Drake's Fortune begins with a cutscene, which a gun battle immediately follows. Smartly, the gun battle takes place on a small boat. Our enemies arrive on other small boats. The game tutorializes shooting, cover, melee, and grenades in a matter of moments. When this short battle is over, we see another cutscene, this one depicting a globe-trottingly drastic change of venue. Then we have a playable, unobstructed, stress-free cinematic traversal segment during which Nathan Drake and his old friend Sully walk through a jungle. Then we see another pre-rendered cutscene. To be perfectly honest, I couldn't believe it. Less than 9 minutes in to Uncharted: Drake's Fortune, we had encountered a Prestige Tour sandwich on cutscene bread. Uncharted: Drake's Fortune, released just 15 days after Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare 1 in November of 2007, had with supreme confidence wielded a brazenly trinket-free, violence-free Prestige Tour less than 9 minutes into the game. Following the cutscene, we learn how to climb, we solve a couple puzzles, some of which require us to shoot an exploding barrel with our gun, and 44 minutes later we encounter deadly enemies. That's almost an entire first hour of a big-budget AAA single-player awards-baiting action game featuring just one fight. So while The Last of Us and Uncharted are deeply different animals, the DNA sharing is rampantly apparent, and doubly as rampantly apparent in Uncharted 2, Among Thieves. The Last of Us presents a critics-shattering Prestige Tour as its very first playable moment. Uncharted gave us a gunfight first because it came out in 2007, the year of Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare 1 and Bioshock. By immediately transitioning from gun tutorial to a non-violent yet meaningfully playable full first hour, Naughty Dog was declaring their revised mission statement loudly and clearly. Congratulations, Naughty Dog. You've been certifiably big prestige since at least 2007. Game flavor number 2. Infected Battle. The Last of Us's iconic fungus zombies simultaneously overwhelm the players with their numbers and reassure the players with their reliability. The infected fall into a number of discrete categories. You can always count on each individual member of an infected category to care about the same things the same way. You have runners who stand around audibly and thus helpfully moaning until they see you, at which point they run at you, screaming, alerting other infecteds. You have clickers who are blind due to fungal overgrowth obscuring their eyes. They prowl, clicking for echolocation. Clickers cannot see you unless you make a sound. If a clicker senses you and touches you, you die, unless you spend a shiv. Finally, we have bloaters. Bloaters are big, dumb jerks who launch weird explosive spore bombs at you, make a lot of noise, kill you instantly if you get too close, and can eat a lot of bullets before dying. You should burn them. Later battles ask you to deal with unavoidable, noisy bloaters while accounting for runners and clickers. Though most battles in The Last of Us achieve miraculous design harmony using just a few clickers, a few runners, some sparse crafting supplies, and level geometry. Infected battles primarily challenge your puzzle solving and situational awareness mechanisms. Infected battles feel less like a first-person shooter level and more like Pac-Man, the movie, the video game. The movie, the video game. Game flavor number 3. Human battles. In addition to fighting infected, you also must on occasion kill your fellow man. Your fellow man can be a real jerk. Early battles in The Last of Us pit Joel against straggling, scrap-hugging pig remnants of the United States federal government. Later battles require the player to outsmart near-feral quote-unquote hunters on their own turf. Humans are much smarter than the infected. They can communicate with one another. They freak out appropriately when they see one of their buddies as dead bodies. They have guns. You can treat each human encounter like a puzzle game, an action game, a stealth game, or a mix of all three. You can toss bottles to distract your opponents long enough for you to slip by, kill them with secret disposable knives, or make big gun noise. And that's it! The Last of Us has exactly 3 game flavors. Even more impressively, it delivers all 3 of these flavors in a vertical slice starting 16 minutes into the game and lasting exactly 44 minutes in length. That's the length of a network prestige television episode. I'm sure someone in the comments will say stealth is a flavor, though it's actually not. Outside of tutorials, The Last of Us does not present any mandatory stealth. Stealth is a tool, not a mode. How does a game with so few flavors get the entire critical establishment yelling? Well, simply put, it does this by blending those flavors, and by playing with dynamically authored difficulty fluctuation. For example, one of the final challenges you face in The Last of Us requires you to transport a ladder from one location to another location in the same room. You've done this several times before. You're going through the motions now, basking in the characters' banter. Joel and Ellie are professionals in a world that does not pay them. Their miserable lives consist of situations of limited variety. We've only seen them do a couple of different things because they only do a couple of different things. Now that's what I call a monotonous apocalypse. By the end of the story, we're good at all of these things because they're good at all of these things. The Last of Us isn't just giving us quote-unquote another ladder puzzle this close to the very end of the game. The Last of Us is giving us one last long opportunity to hang out with these characters, to eavesdrop on their conversations, to palpate the growth of their relationship. The Last of Us's final ladder puzzle is longer and more complicated than any ladder puzzle we've seen yet in the game, though even so, we don't even flinch at it. We purposefully and dutifully blow through each step of the process. Looking back on The Last of Us's ladder puzzles in 2020, remembering how some players I know personally made fun of them back in 2013, I finally realized their genius. With its slow-paced room traversal puzzles, The Last of Us treats players to simply visible problems requiring stress-free solutions. For 7.97% of its 12-hour, 28-minute playing time, The Last of Us treats us to semi-mundane, non-violent problem-solving situations completely inside our control. The Last of Us's famously uncomfortably violent combat, meanwhile, seeks on levels both aesthetic and mechanical to impress upon the players situations outside their control. Handling combat in The Last of Us well requires us to negotiatingly earn a feeling of control. Combat stresses the player the heck out. Traversal puzzles lend the player temporary security. Alternating these dynamically opposed sensations puffs up the player's impression of The Last of Us as a big, full game. Slyly inching the difficulty down and later back up in widely spaced battle encounters makes the game feel like one the player has been playing for a very long time. Of course, The Last of Us's strategically calibrated difficulty plateau eventually leaps up into a final encounter that does in fact feel drastically different from every other action encounter in the game. You paint yourself into a corner when you design a game this way, and I gotta say, when you handle it right, that corner owns. As Robert McKee says in his screenwriting Bible, story, wow them in the end, and you've got a hit. Don't just take my critical analysis's word for it, take my analytical analysis's word for it as well. Yes, my friends, it's time to enter the data zone. The Last of Us possesses so tastefully few flavors that I found it appropriate to make a couple pie charts. Let's start with a complete breakdown of every frame of my normal mode playthrough. This includes an other category representing all of my time spent being lost, using photo mode, admiring the graphics, or simply standing around staring at animals for the purpose of having a nice long video clip to display blurred out underneath a pie chart later in this segment. I consider this an organic play experience. It was my first time playing the game in 6 years, so my rustiness with the level design shows in the data. I took longer to stealth my way through battles than I might have 6 years ago, and I also spent more time hanging out in the world during the down key moments. For scientific reasons related to the subjective nature of video games as entertainment, I've decided that this exact playthrough presents the best example for breaking down for our structure atlas. If we subtract the hour and change of error time, the data cleans up a bit and looks like this. I should point out that this data reflects deaths and restarts in combat. I consider dying and restarting an organic part of the game experience. I chose warm colors for violence flavors and cool colors for non-violence flavors. Cutscenes I've represented as gray. Cutscenes occasionally depict violence, though they just as occasionally do not. I did perform a quick analysis of violence versus non-violence in The Last of Us's cutscenes and came away with an estimate that the cutscenes are over 70% non-violent. However, my data is presently inconclusive. I plan to conclude it as part of a later video in this series. Though as you can see, if we subtract error, cutscenes fully account for 16.6% of the time my Mind Palace profiled quote-unquote average player spends with The Last of Us. That is a lot. In the interest of further cleaning up the data, let's subtract the cutscenes and look only at the playable portion of the game. As you can see, we still have a gray wedge here. This represents time spent in crafting menus or at workbenches in non-violent moments of the game. These crafting moments do, in fact, represent preparation for violence, though they're not violent in and of themselves and do occur exclusively during the explicitly non-violent parts of the game. So for now, let's call them a gray area. I should note that any time spent backpack rummaging or crafting items during battle contributed to its respective category's battle statistic. Seeing as every action in The Last of Us happens in real time and the danger does not pause while you craft, this seemed indisputably appropriate. However, it seemed so indisputably appropriate that I found it acceptable to roll downtime crafting and workbench moments into the non-violent category. So let's actually combine all 3 flavors of Prestige Tour and the 2 flavors of combat into 2 categories: non-violence and violence. Let's leave cutscenes in here as a gray wedge. We can see that, remarkably, The Last of Us is a mostly non-violent video game. If we subtract cutscenes from this and focus on just the playable parts of the game, it's even easier to see the balance of non-violence and violence. Now let's get into a gray area. In a game as enormously cinematic as The Last of Us, we cannot justify not calling the cutscenes a core feature. Even if you skip the cutscenes in your later perfectionism-chasing playthroughs, chances are huge you're going to watch all of the cutscenes as a player of The Last of Us at least once. If anyone out there watching this skipped any of the cutscenes on their first playthrough of The Last of Us, I do not know how to help you with literally anything. So in order to obtain a true violence versus non-violence number, we need to include cutscenes. For this argument, I'd say that quote-unquote violence in a video game only counts when the player perpetrates it through control commands. I understand this is a tenuous argument, though I did also lump cutscenes in as non-violent for the Final Fantasy VII Remake's data, even though those cutscenes also display violence and action. I'm going to presume that Tomonobu Itagaki, designer-director of Ninja Gaiden Black, one of the 10 best games of all time probably, would agree with us that cutscenes can't be considered nearly in the same category as game action. So let's go ahead and consider this an action versus inaction ratio if we want. Also, to get perfectly technical, let's reflect for a moment on how most of the combat in The Last of Us doesn't actually involve shooting and stabbing as much as it involves mindful watching and waiting. All that said, including cutscenes as non-action skyrockets that non-violence number. Look at that! The Last of Us is officially 63.85% non-violent. For those keeping score, the Final Fantasy VII Remake was only 61.13% non-violent. I gotta say, I did not expect them to be this close, though I did somehow get the impression that The Last of Us would win. I mean, it was that hunch that made me want to do this review as the next review. And yes, I realize that my numbers for the Final Fantasy VII Remake do in fact reflect 45 hours of playtime versus 12 hours, 28 minutes, and 40 seconds of The Last of Us, though you gotta admit, that's a striking comparison. It's almost like some executives ordered a research study to workshop a mathematically quote-unquote good ratio for player satisfaction. Perhaps we'll follow up on this in a later episode, in which I reveal that one of the most stereotypically quote-unquote violent video games in human history is actually more about being lost than it is about killing anything. At any rate, it's easy to look at these two final pie charts and think that the Final Fantasy VII Remake and The Last of Us represent all AAA video games and encapsulate the games industry at large's formulaic nature. Though here's where I deploy my favorite vocabulary word I learned in that one screenwriting class I took 23 years ago. Pacing. If we look at this marked and sorted timeline showing the entire duration of The Last of Us from title screen to credits, we can see how finely chopped and gingerly mixed its elements are. Where the Final Fantasy VII Remake borrowed from ancient PlayStation 1 games and modern television programs, The Last of Us flows much more like a miniseries or a film. Where the Final Fantasy VII Remake was a tossed salad, The Last of Us is a melting pot. The Last of Us's primary pacing trick is to enter battle flavor loops. For entire chapters of the game, The Last of Us puts us only in battles against infected or humans, interspersing these encounters with precision-targeted hyper-brief battles of the other flavor. This delicate blend is just one of the psychological ways The Last of Us makes 12 hours of play duration feel huge. The other is the environment designs. They're as big as levels can get before you start to wonder why you can't go in every door. If you ask me, The Last of Us's largish, openish levels are more exciting than most luxuriously vacant open world games I've ever played. Though we can talk about that some other day. After enough cycles of infected battle and human battle, the player begins to bleed the tactics together. Both battle flavors benefit uniquely from the same small selection of craftable items. The player starts to categorize the differences and similarities in the battle types until eventually each is informing the other. Stealth skills you experimentally sharpen against the unintelligent infected benefit your performance against humans. The relatively exploded complexity requires you to level up these skills. You proceed to take these leveled up skills with you into your next battle against the mindless zombies. The zombies make the humans more interesting. The humans make the zombies more interesting. The infected's almost 8-bit Mega Man boss-like predictable patterns elevates them above other game zombies. Their familiar reliability generates shocking contrast against the human battles. In this way, The Last of Us uses its two distinct battle types to pull off a sort of magic trick. If you ever thought zombies in a game were boring, it's probably because that game didn't also have encounters against dynamically artificially intelligent human opponents. As I've already covered in too exhaustive detail, The Last of Us's prestige tours present story context-saturated opportunities to scavenge trinkets usable to craft consumable items, the exact dollar value utility of which we come to perfectly understand as the game's brutal, heavy, realistic combat encounters pummel our psyches. So The Last of Us rolls on, alternating these two combat flavors around prestige tours of varying depth and magnitude, working for and earning the narrative beats that pull the game's story forward. Each of these three flavors feeds the other, generating the food from out of thin air. I'd say each of these hands washes the other, though that'd make 3 hands. Also, nobody washes their hands in The Last of Us. Yes, the action is, quote, uncomfortable by design, unquote. However, that doesn't mean we can't enjoy it. We can enjoy thinking about it. We can enjoy planning for it. We can derive genuine pleasure from admiring the gumption of its craft. And furthermore, I know I personally can enjoy something while
feeling something.
In summary, The Last of Us shows us a bare-bottom, minimalist vision of, to give an extreme example, the Japanese role-playing game with all its armor stripped away. It reveals that all narrative games are more closely related than you might think. Between prestige scrounges, we have a hyper-small number of memorable battles in geometrically interesting locales. The fights in The Last of Us are so memorable that I didn't even need to scrutinize my footage to count them. I simply sat on my sofa, stared at my turned-off television, and counted. Oh man, it says here that I should count them in my head on camera, idiot. It says count them in your head on camera, idiot. I sort of purposely avoided counting them, and I told myself while I was writing the script that I would challenge myself to count them in my head on camera. I mean, I'm not just going to leave the whole counting process in here, uncut, so you're going to have no idea how long this took me. 20 infected battles and 27 human battles. I think. We're just going to go with that number. Of course, I won't even pretend that I can count off the top of my head exactly what percentage of the game consisted of which element. So, despite The Last of Us's highly memorable nature and brevity, I did in fact need to apply the action button method for video game analysis and criticism in order to answer a few questions. Before my first 2020 replay of the game, I hypothesized that the infected battles and human battles would roughly balance each other out, yet add up to less than 50% of the game's total length. I banked on prestige tours and cutscenes adding up to 53% or more of the playable game. Selfishly, I wanted trinket scrounging to account for 21% of the playable game. My memory of The Last of Us prior to replaying it was that it featured heavy trinket scrounging made boundlessly meaningful by atmosphere and convergence of minimalist game design systems. My experience with the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which consisted of 4% trinket scrounging, had inspired me a curiosity. Could a game feature quintuply more trinket scrounging, yet somehow feel less laborious than the Final Fantasy VII Remake's 4%? I wrote this hypothesis down in Sublime Text 3 and saved it as hypothesis.txt. After my first replay of The Last of Us on normal mode, I looked at the hypothesis and thought,
well, okay.
Then I replayed the game once more, on easy mode. I had never played through The Last of Us on easy mode. In my review of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, I'd stake to claim that the perfect game will have no difficulty modes, and I intend to elaborate on that a lot in upcoming reviews. For now, suffice it to say that I wanted the data points from easy mode. I theorized that the combat portions of easy mode would be faster than normal mode, though not by any more than 5%. Here I should note that I have played through The Last of Us on grounded difficulty before, and I have based most of the subjective design analysis in this video so far heavily on that old experience. With this easy mode playthrough, I was looking for something new. I wanted the experience of betting the other way. Easy mode helped me facilitate a role-playing exercise. With easy mode, I was able to borrow the experience of being a person who has played all the way through The Last of Us 100 times, when really I've only played through it 6 times. I wanted to blow through easy mode for the purpose of collecting objective data I have logged in a secret spreadsheet, and we will talk about that secret spreadsheet in a later review. After my easy mode playthrough, I analyzed my data. Even with the fresh knowledge of having just completed a normal mode playthrough, my easy mode playthrough's total battle time only shaved 7% off my normal mode's total combined battle time. That's not bad. As for the moment-to-moment structure of The Last of Us, we can see that, as I hypothesized, it's relatively well pureed. The 20 infected battles account for 17.5% of the game time. The 27 human battles account for 25.53% of the game time. Prestige tours of the cinematic traversal variety account for 24.6% of the game time. Survival scrounges account for 17.93%. So I'd say my hypothesis was pretty close. Why did I tell you all these numbers? First of all, because some people like numbers. If you don't think these numbers are interesting now, please wait till you see what I'm going to do with them later. And secondly, I told you all these numbers because they helped me make the decision I'm going to declare at the end of this video.
Wow.
This section on minimalism sure ran long, huh?
Wow.
Replayability defines The Last of Us. At one groundbreaking moment in their relationship, Joel trusts Ellie with a gun. It's not just any gun, it's a sniper rifle. That's the daddy of guns. After a brief lecture about how to shoulder the stock, he tells her to make every shot count. This is premium daddish gun advice. Nobody, trained soldier or not, goes into combat specifically intending to take any shots that don't count. By this point in the game, we, the player, gauding over the burgeoning mutual respect of these two really interesting fictional individuals, know this game's definition of the value of $1. We know that bullets are rare, just like blades and alcohol and sugar and explosives and rags. Maybe at this point in the game, we, the player, have not made every shot count. If so, we are making cutscene Joel look like a real do-as-I-say, not-as-I-do sort of dad. So by this point, whether for reasons game mechanical or related to our pride in our own performance, we've already considered a replay through maybe once or twice. How we play, how we manipulate Joel has, at the latest, by this point, become a genuine part of the story. Yes, my friends, gameplay is cutscenes. The Last of Us is a game designed to be replayed. The Last of Us offers significantly drippy atmosphere within each of its varying scenes, though undeniably plot pulls the experience relentlessly forward. We roleplay as a man who wouldn't know how to stop and smell the roses if the roses shot him in the face. So why does it inspire so many of its players to soak in its juices more than once? To replay a game is to re-perform. When I say performance, I mean both technically, the way a sports athlete performs by more meticulously manipulating the mechanical elements, and theatrically. When we play The Last of Us a second time, we know Joel's full story. We have rehearsed. We can handle situations the way the full man that we know would handle them. We carve out a playstyle worthy of Joel's drama. The Last of Us offers myriad flavors of replayability. Most players who wind up playing The Last of Us a second time do so because they want to play it again on a harder difficulty, which coincidentally also mathematically encourages deeper role-playing. While writing this review, I talked to several friends, many of whom played The Last of Us a second time back in 2013 on the same difficulty. One non-hardcore game-playing friend voiced their reasons for a replay like this: "I just wanted to play it
Better.
I love that." Furthermore, we can replay The Last of Us to perform it for someone else who doesn't want to play it themselves. Few video games are as filler-free, time-wasteless, and easy to exhibit to a game-disinterested companion as The Last of Us. Back in 2013, I played The Last of Us to completion for an audience of 2 game-agnostic friends over the course of 2 weekend sessions. I think my sloppy gunplay didn't annoy them, and they seemed to genuinely enjoy shouting out strategies, or encouraging me to search such and such upstairs bedroom during a trinket scrounge. We all fell dead silent for the duration of every cutscene. I also rewatched seasons 1 and 2 of Game of Thrones with those same 2 friends on the 2 other weekends of that same month. So even before they officially announced a The Last of Us HBO series, The Last of Us has pretty much been the HBO series of itself. that many people have told me they replayed The Last of Us simply for the joy of witnessing the story again is a powerful notion on its own. People are out there treating this game like a movie.
That's great.
I'm personally most interested in the mechanically somewhat sinister ways The Last of Us compels a player to play again while they're in the middle of their first playthrough. In the spirit of every other element of its design and presentation, The Last of Us positions regret as a game mechanical cornerstone. Our hero is old and sad and full of regret, audible within his cutscene vocabulary and even in his bantering sighs. Maybe his attitude subtly infects us. Even in the middle of an individual encounter, maybe the instant we pass the point of no return, shifting the odds firmly into our favor, we're thinking about how we'd handle this if we had to do it again. It's not just Joel's dramatically heavy fullness with regret that inspires this thinking in us. The Last of Us presents level design geometry and enemy encounter design of such immediately graspable simplicity that even the most casual player seeing a gun game for the first time will immediately osmose the relevant history of multiplayer shooters, survival horror, and tactical stealth espionage. Immediately after their first death, even the newest of game unacquainted players understands they can solve any encounter in this game with at least 100 subtly different method combinations. The Last of Us presents players with experimentation encouraging White Castle slider-sized situations galore with Moorishness. It's up to you, the player, to decide how to mix quiet action and noisy action. It's up to you, the player, to decide if and then when to break stealth. Early in the game, you might think,
That went pretty bad there at the end.
a replayability seed has planted itself. Owing to the scarcity of resources, how you handle one situation can influence how you handle a later situation. Eventually, you find yourself in the middle of one situation, reflecting on an earlier situation. You think, if only I hadn't used that shiv on that guy. You especially feel this on the grounded difficulty, where crafting supplies are blood diamond scarce. Thus, The Last of Us plants a louder seed of replayability. Here, even as you grind your nose against the difficulty ceiling, you regret micro-decisions that occurred literal hours ago. You scrape by in your current encounter, declare,
That'll do.
and then leave the situation behind because of the narrative's relentless forward pull. Maybe your first playthrough looks like a birthday clown playing Metal Gear Solid on easy mode with a DualShock made of balloon animal balloons. Your second playthrough, you scrounge more. You luxuriate in the world. You roleplay deeper. Here we come back to my personal favorite example of The Last of Us's minimalist, tabletop-y design restraint, the tool level. The first time I played through The Last of Us, I missed one of the tool level upgrades. Yes, I was that punk to whom I previously alluded, who arrived upon the story's final challenges possessing a lackadaisical arsenal. My second time through, I found them all. That alone made it worth playing through the game a second time, and on a harder difficulty. On the micro level, the game subtly encourages replay psychology in its players by way of a few tiny, dirty tricks. Most pertinently, The Last of Us has a real knack for auto-saving immediately after you break stealth. If you die, the enemies are already alerted. So it is that even on easy mode, The Last of Us encourages you to take stealth seriously if you're going to even try stealth at all. And yes, I know you can restart the encounter, though sometimes you don't want to restart the whole encounter, you just want to get through the encounter and through the game, right? This is a low-key game design masterstroke. I guess I typed the word masterstroke in my script a few hundred words after making fun of other video game reviewers for using the word masterstroke. Strict without being excessive, game designerly without breaking immersion. These tiny tricks masterpiecishly add up, ultimately congealing into the inimitable flavor of over 200 Game of the Year awards. I'd say it's about time we got to the point. The point today involves a discussion of one of my favorite video game tropes to talk about, the Babychild-Bigfriend situation. The Last of Us so succinctly marries its narrative and its game mechanics that when I met Troy Baker in person at a party at IGN.com's offices the day the game came out in 2013, I told him, "Dude, your performance was so good that the day after I beat the game, I literally went out shopping for backpacks." Troy Baker looked me right in the eye and said, and I quote,
Okay, man.
"Troy, I was not joking. In fact, I got so into backpacks that today, June 12th, 2020, I happen to own a GoRuck GR1 rucksack. That's Navy SEAL uniform compatible. In my continuing pursuit of rugged Americanistic apocalyptic readiness, I even ended up purchasing several sugarcane work shirts, a pair of sugarcane 1947 jeans, and even a pair of Red Wing Iron Rangers. I'll admit, I'm a privileged idiot whose career path and lifestyle shields me from most of the world's ills. Yet, somehow, thanks in part to logistically meticulous apocalyptic fictions like The Last of Us and Death Stranding, I've become enthralled by, to give one example, buy-it-for-life, non-biodegradable, dead-stock U.S. military heavy nylon twill flight jackets. I've spent the better part of my life finding entertainment and visions of apocalypses. As of 2013, I'd tried watching one episode of AMC's The Walking Dead and didn't like the dialogue. In 2020, I watched a full season of The Walking Dead because I like Norman Reedus now, while brutally ill with the coronavirus, and I found it too realistic to enjoy. Back in 2012, I'd played Telltale's game The Walking Dead and loved its tasteful application of post-Kojima narrative trickery. And in 2013, I played The Last of Us and got, for the first time in my life, something that I had never realized post-apocalyptic fiction had always been passing up an opportunity to give me. The Walking Dead video game had shown me, Game of the Year award-winningly, that an extreme world situation does in fact provide suitable background for a story depicting the interactive relationship blossoming between two human individuals. However, The Last of Us gave me more. Maybe I'm telling on myself that I'm some kinda ignoramus when I say this, though here it is. I think The Last of Us impressed me with its story of fatherhood as much as it did because it made me deal with so much paraphernalious, scroungy, crafty video game design stuff in the middle of it. If The Last of Us's main character, Joel, hadn't been wearing such a visually prominent backpack, if he hadn't had to kneel so many times to dig around in that backpack, if his friend Tess hadn't said so early in the story,
There's your backpack.
maybe my mind wouldn't have opened enough to let the fatherhood narrative all the way in. It occurs to me today that Naughty Dog has always been good at making its playable characters feel like characters. I realize this might not sound like a huge achievement, so let me try to explain what I mean. The player stars in the lead role of The Last of Us's story. One of The Last of Us's most sublime accomplishments is how it instills in the player empathy for the protagonist Joel, if not sympathy. The game's mechanics pummel us until we feel like Joel, tired, old, desperate, and sad, as we violently solve struggly problems in view of Ellie, our young, desperate, sad companion. Ellie's daughter figurishness in The Last of Us impressed critics so much in 2013 because up until then, Naughty Dog had conditioned players to enjoy the questionable complexity of Uncharted's Nathan Drake, a man who was really good at being alone. In Uncharted Drake's Fortune, Naughty Dog realized a rich character in Nathan Drake. Sure, he was a bit of a shallow, little brotherly, adventure-style dude, though his quips and mannerisms threw enough dry sticks onto the fire to kindle imaginations of an interior world. Okay, I realize I called Nathan Drake a rich character a couple seconds ago, though I'm talking about 2007 here, okay? Nathan Drake was definitely a richer character than 2007's Super Mario Galaxy's Super Mario. In both 2007 and in my 2020 replay of the original Uncharted Drake's Fortune, I felt the distinct sensation that Nathan Drake was the star, and I, the player, was his trophy girlfriend, giving up my time and my life to cheer him on in his endeavors. It's like this. How often do you refer to a character in a movie by the actor's name? I love those Mission Impossible movies, and I know the hero's name is Ethan Hunt, though I always call him Tom Cruise. On the other hand, nobody I'd want to hang out with calls Han Solo or Indiana Jones Harrison Ford. Meanwhile, I don't call Nathan Drake me. I don't say, I shot a bunch of dudes in that level. I say, Nathan Drake shoots a bunch of dudes in that level. I don't mean this as an insult. I find this genuinely interesting. I can't think of too many other video games where I call the protagonist by name when I'm talking about my play experience. Even with a character action game, I don't say, Dante fights a big monster. I say, I fought a big monster. I don't say Bayonetta guillotines a bunch of angels. I say I guillotined a bunch of angels, always subtly shifting the game experience into the past tense. With The Last of Us's second-person companion Ellie, Naughty Dog exercises their character-building, storytelling experience to make Joel game-designedly feel like our parent. And as a 41-year-old person, I can tell you that eventually, whether you like it or not, you do start to remind yourself of at least one of your parents. I won't spoil when it happens, though. Just trust me that it does happen. Thus, onto the whole birth of The Last of Us, Joel's daddyishness casts a long shadow that darkens and hardens every mechanic, every cutscene, every optional dialogue, every tucked-away optional world-building cranny, every strangle of a desperate freak, every squeeze of a gun trigger, and every meticulously level-designed corner of level geometry. We call him Joel. He is us, though he is also a person. Most simply and molecularly, we call him Joel because Ellie calls him Joel. She says Joel at least once every 5 minutes of the game.
Shit, Joel.
This is instantly hallmarky character architecture. This 14-year-old girl is so tough, she nonchalantly addresses a middle-aged man as she would an office colleague. Slowly, without calling our attention to it, the narrative shows Joel begin to trust Ellie. In one mid-game cutscene, she saves Joel's life with the very gun he previously denied her in the name of safety. Shortly afterward, after half a game's length of asking her to quote-unquote wait here and don't touch anything, while he solves a busy-worky environmental puzzle, Joel asks for Ellie's help in pushing a piano. Shortly after that, he lets her have a gun. Ellie covers Joel with sniper fire during one monstrously pivotal action scene. Without calling our attention to it any more than it has to, The Last of Us starts letting Ellie perform melee kills with a knife. By the time the story hits a twist and suddenly we're playing as Ellie, stalking a deer in the forest of a winter, we trust her the way a daddy might trust his daughter. The Walking Dead, the video game, had shown us Clementine. BioShock Infinite had shown us Elizabeth. The Last of Us showed us Ellie and Joel. As the third game of the daddy-daughter trilogy, The Last of Us was the first one to really flesh that daddy out with narrative design beef. Ever since The Last of Us happened, if you throw a rock in a room full of people who are talking about video games, you've a 1 in 4 chance, at least, of hitting someone who just finished saying, literally every game nowadays is about a sad dad. Oh yeah? Is every game nowadays about a sad dad? Name 5 of them. The Walking Dead was 2012. BioShock Infinite and The Last of Us were 2013. God of War 2018 was 2018. That's 4. That's all I got. Max Payne doesn't count. Nier doesn't count. Red Dead Redemption doesn't count. Heavy Rain doesn't count. The Witcher 3 doesn't count. Octodad doesn't even count. The child figure has to be present for at least 80% of the gameplay, or it does not count as a dad game. The way I look at it, we've only got those 4 real dad games. And you know what? I don't even think we should call them dad games. Dadliness isn't even really the key factor of these games. These characters may be dads with children either biological or adoptive, though I'd argue that the far more hookish element here is the protector-protected dynamic. Having a mobile, relatively helpless danger magnet present in every action encounter adds a clean thrill. Stretch with me for a second. If we consider dies if they take enough damage to be one of the core pillars of the definition of player character, that makes the character we're supposed to protect in a video game escort mission at least partially a player character, right? Seldom does a game liker utter the phrase escort mission without bookending it with expletives. When a game throws us an escort mission, we usually have a bad time. However, few people hesitate to declare Fumito Ueda's game Ico one of the best games of all time. Ico is a game-length escort mission. Between Ico and Bioshock Infinite, someone modded Warcraft 3 and called it Defense of the Ancients. Game designers everywhere started thinking critically about passive companions.
Minions.
Somebody on some AAA single-player awards-baiting video game development team somewhere, maybe without saying it out loud, asked,
What if the character you're escorting wasn't completely helpless?
"Give a minion a name, and you've got yourself a baby child." Bioshock Infinite happened. Bioshock Infinite's baby child, Elizabeth, sprints around with a big dumb Disney princess grin on her face through every bullet-spraying skirmish, and occasionally helps with a small set of abilities I've honestly disremembered the details of because they were so boring. The Last of Us gives us a baby child named Ellie, helpless at first, eventually pulling in a healthy percentage of the kills. Like Elizabeth, she too is undetectable by enemies for some reason the story does not bother to justify. Occasionally, the game decides that an enemy should endanger her, adding a pending game over token to the player's task list. Save Ellie or die. 5 years later, God of War 2018 gave us Kratos' skill tree upgradable son Atreus, whom we can equip with a variety of armors and specialized bows with arrows. Kratos is a real big friend, and Atreus is an especially minion-esque baby child. God of War 2018 cracked the dad game code. The dad wasn't what players loved. Players loved the development of a character sketched Game of the Year award-winningly in game design. Cutscenes and scrounging banter also sketch Ellie, though 3 sketches make a portrait, and her subtle growth into a player character forms the entire lumbar portion of The Last of Us's backbone. Without a skill tree, without upgradable, level-upable abilities, without purchasable outfits and equipment, Ellie levels up game-wise as narratively the hard world tries and fails to beat her down. She changes outfits off-camera, between chapters, according merely to the taste she possesses in her fictional brain. Subtract from this any parental sentimentality and look just at the numbers. You're looking at what I call a Babychild-Bigfriend situation. Think of your favorite fictional adoptive parents who educate their younger companion in character-building ways. The Hound and Arya Stark in Game of Thrones, there's a real good example off the top of my head. A Babychild-Bigfriend situation works well in video games because the medium of video games so often imparts its loudest catharses in numerically provable character development. The Last of Us provides us small integers when it comes to crafting recipes, inventory space for ingredients, clip sizes for our weapons, and even the number of enemies in any given combat encounter. You know what? I'm going to go through my footage and count exactly how many enemies you encounter in The Last of Us. I didn't do it before writing this script. I'm writing this so that when I film this and edit this part of the video, I'll remember to go through the whole game and count all the enemies. I'll put a number on the screen to report to you exactly how many enemies the player encounters in the entire length of The Last of Us. Quite frankly, I'm interested in seeing how many it is. The player encounters so few enemies in each encounter of The Last of Us that when Ellie finally kills one of them without any input from the player, the Babychild-Bigfriend situation pops off like a brain chemical 4th of July. When you really think about it a little too much, which it has always been my unfortunate habit to do, we have here objective proof that Ellie is, in fact, the main character of The Last of Us. Think with me here. The first kill that happens in The Last of Us, we witness in third person, while we control Joel's late daughter, Sarah. We stand by while Joel kills the first person-shaped life form he's probably ever killed in his life. From the very start, The Last of Us is making a loud statement about looking at our companion, about the starring nature of someone else in our lives. The Last of Us shocked critics with its sophistication because we critics didn't take time to slowly enough unpack all the subliminally exacto-knifey narrative and game design tricks it executed to make us into such enthusiastic spectators of Ellie's character development. All God of War 2018 had to do was give this its own menu, and there you have it. Every game liker and their little brother was saying, every game is about dads now. Do something well enough once, and everybody starts calling you everybody. In summary, want to make a below-average action game at least pretty good? Give the player character a MacGuffin, who's also a person, and also a minion. Give that minion a name and a voice. Congratulations, you just made a baby child. Make the baby child a sad loser at the beginning of the game. Make the baby child eventually score 1 kill. Inch that number up. If you can figure out a way to have the baby child take damage and die, permanently affecting the remainder of the story, you've got yourself a couple hundred goaties. And that's the straight dope. And now it's time for the bottom line. The Last of Us is a great game by default. The Last of Us shows us a world built for video games. Every fallen over dresser in a house or piled up rusted solid car on a mossy highway makes sense as both level design and story. The Last of Us's uncomfortable heavy action violence belongs in this terrible world. The harmonic resonance of its two protagonists' sadness and regret blesses us with magical hope amidst all the ruins of the late civilization. With ginger systems and small integers, The Last of Us sketches a psychology our brains need work only minimally to complete. And where it does not require our imaginations, it pummels us with the beauty of nature reclaiming a destroyed world. Its top-tier graphics wow us. Though beyond mere technological muscle, it wows us with subliminal artistic thoughtfulness. Look how Joel's position relative to the camera conforms even seemingly unimportant traversal segments to the rule of thirds. With relentless commitment to story locomotion, The Last of Us shows us new situations with new dramatic payoffs at a pace texturally similar to literature. The Last of Us is a remarkably clean game, made seemingly by the sheer substance of 1,000 game designers' loneliest unspoken dreams. Back in 2013, when I originally reviewed The Last of Us for ActionButton.net, I assigned it the bottom line, The Last of Us is a glue-wet gun. By this, I meant that the game's design and narrative work in such seamless concert that sticking to our guns isn't even an option. The gun is sticky already. We only need to pick the gun up. We stick to the gun because the gun sticks to us. This conviction to itself defines The Last of Us, a game that so superlatively combines and intertwines game design and narrative that you don't even have to like the game design or the narrative to admire their combination. Way back in 2003, Naughty Dog touted the best PlayStation 2 game of all time, Jak 2's multi-genre nature. Jak 2 had platforming on par with Super Mario 64. It had precision driving on par with Ridge Racer or at least Grand Theft Auto 3. It had shooting on par with Ratchet & Clank. It had skateboarding on par with Tony Hawk. And it had a plot on par with the sort of Saturday morning cartoon that my big brother wouldn't make fun of me for watching. 10 years later, Naughty Dog had made a third Jak and 2 Uncharted's, and now we had The Last of Us. Naughty Dog's multi-genre fusion mission had matured and crystallized. Where once the visibility of Jak 2's striations had impressed us, Now we had grown up and appreciated the smoothness of The Last of Us's gradient. Puzzle, strategy, survival, action, shooting, stealth, and exploration fused into one smooth experience, permanently sure of its convictions. A gun that becomes part of us when we pick it up. By virtue of its contextually relevant trinkets alone, and their presentation within luxurious optional prestige tours complete with companionship banter and visible world building, The Last of Us is, as of June 2020, Action Button's pick for the #1 best video game of all time, edging out previous contender, the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Spoilers, the Final Fantasy VII Remake is definitely going to stay at the bottom of our list. Probably forever. Unless enough backers of patreon.com/actionbutton or members of discord.gg/actionbutton dare to beg me in messages to review Bioshock. I'll do it. I don't even care. I just need 200 Patreon backers or 600 Discord members to personally ask me to do it. The Last of Us won 231 Game of the Year awards according to goatypicks.blogspot.com, making it the most awarded video game in history. Yet despite listing several websites that I'm pretty sure don't even exist, goatypicks.blogspot.com fails to list actionbutton.net in any of its GOATY lists. I did declare The Last of Us 2013's Game of the Year back in early 2014, though I did so on my personal Twitter. Even so, shouldn't a website bold enough to call itself goatypicks.blogspot.com have located and tabulated my vote via Twitter? I would like to end this review by entreating whoever runs goatypicks.blogspot.com to add actionbutton.net to The Last of Us's Game of the Year awards list. 2 of those Game of the Year awards made that number non-prime. The least I can offer is to make it a palindrome. Also, I would like to take this moment to entreat the Game Awards voters to vote for Gustavo Santaolalla for the award for Best Musical Score for The Last of Us Part 2 this year, to make up for the Spike VGX Awards snubbing The Last of Us Part 1 in favor of Grand Theft Auto 5 for the Best Musical Score Award in 2013. Seriously, that was embarrassing. Oh, and while I'm making requests, hey Naughty Dog, if you're watching this, can I get a code for Uncharted 4? My buddy Delicious McCune borrowed the physical copy of Uncharted 4 you sent me back in 2016, and I don't think he's ever going to give it back. I just kinda want to play it a little bit again for the sake of my secret spreadsheet, and I've got a pretty good streak going with my never having paid from one of your games. I'd take a The Last of Us Part 2 code as well, because Sony didn't send me one. That's why I had to make this video instead of one about The Last of Us Part 2. My video about The Last of Us Part 2 was gonna be so good, dude. I was gonna say, they shoulda called it Some More of Us. Actually, that was probably all I had to say about The Last of Us Part 2. And this has been all I have to say about The Last of Us Part 1. We hold these truths to be self-evident. That video games were created awesome. That I was born stupid. However, I will not die hungry. Video games forever. Action Button. That's it. We're done. Bibby Babbis isn't a naughty dog. He's a good dog. Well, that's the end of the video. We've come to the end of yet another Action Button review. I said it was going to be remarkably shorter than the Final Fantasy VII Remake review. I think depending on your definition of remarkable, you could say this one's shorter. It's definitely shorter if you look at the timestamp. I will say this one was much easier to make since it was a game I've been thinking about for 6-7 years. First of all, I would like to thank Naughty Dog for sending me the game 7 years ago and 6 years ago. I would also like to thank my good dog for just being there for me. He's not a naughty dog. If he had a game company, it would be called Good Beast software. I'd like to thank Josh Watson for helping me do a huge portion of the editing. He was very helpful this time around. I should probably pay him some money. That's a joke. Of course I'm going to pay him some money. Actually, as soon as I finish editing this epilogue segment, I'm going to message you on Discord and talk to you about getting you paid for all the wonderful help that you've given me. I mean, by the time you were seeing this, we've already had the conversation, so a little bit weird. I want to thank Fred Wood for, he's at That's My Trunks on Twitter. He's real good at Twitter. Check him out on Twitter. He did 2 incredibly good Photoshops for me that I kind of don't want to spoil because I know a lot of people love to skip around YouTube videos. You might have skipped here to the end to see just the ending segment that I made. He did 2 of my favorite parts of the video, which are just 2 little screens that I show twice. He did 2 really good Photoshops. When I put the one he did for The Last of Us Part 2, when I lined it up with my joke about The Last of Us Part 2, I lolled real loud, real hard. It was pretty good. I want to thank everybody who backs me on Patreon, which is, again, I still think that's weird. I think you're a bunch of, that there are several thousand people with peculiar tastes who prefer to see videos like this over videos by people who were popular in high school. I don't know. I don't know why. I'm disappointed in myself. Next video is about Doom, and I know that as soon as this video goes up, I'm going to get a million questions about which version of Doom am I going to review. All will be answered in time. Let me just say that the video I have in mind, which I see as the first real action button video. I don't know if you thought this video was real and you thought the Final Fantasy VII video was real. Thank you, though this next one will probably shatter your mind because it's shattering my mind just thinking about it. It's a lot more interesting than the question of which version of Doom am I going to review or focus on. I will say no more. All will be revealed soon. You might have noticed a significant portion of running time remains in this video, so let me tell you about that. I originally planned to have a segment about story in here, about the story of the game, to lay out the themes and dissect the character relationships and talk about why I think it's a good story, first of all, and second of all, why I think it's a good video game story. I did talk a lot in this review, somewhat repetitively, about the way game design and story intermingle and mesh together in ways that I think are genuinely interesting. And I know The Last of Us gets talked about a lot. People say it's the Citizen Kane of games. I've heard that before. It gets talked about a lot. I think we've probably talked about The Last of Us for, we've got about 100 years worth of discourse has happened in the last 7 years since this game came out. Over 200 Game of the Year awards. Most awarded game in recorded history. I think there's probably been a lot of really, really smart conversation about The Last of Us's plot and its intermingling of its plot and game design and narrative design that I might not have seen or I might have missed. I didn't want to be too redundant. Part of the goal of this review was to actually establish a sort of core loopy rhythm somewhat structurally reminiscent of the game that I was reviewing, which is why I ended up re-reviewing the same points multiple times in the video. Hopefully somebody saw that and thought, oh, I bet that was on purpose, and now you know it was on purpose. I do a lot of stuff on purpose. I do plenty of stuff on accident, let me tell you. Make a lot of mistakes. I don't make mistakes, I repeat mistakes. I've been saying that for a couple of years now, so I don't just repeat mistakes, I repeat the stuff I say. This game integrates game design and narrative design in a way that I think is genuinely worthy of a little bit of more of an academic study than this. I think critics could look at, if there's any critics watching, the practical value of your crafted tools makes you reflect on the scarcity of the ingredient items, which makes you reflect on the length of the scrounging sessions between missions, which require you to witness visible, tangible, audible world building, which requires you to role play as the character Joel. And I said a couple times in this video that The Last of Us has more in common with the Dungeons and Dragons campaign than it does with Metal Gear Solid or whatever. And I said it in maybe a way that you might think sounds kind of jokey, though I really do think that, and I really do think that's interesting. I think talking about a game player as an actor in a role is interesting. We say role-playing a lot when we talk about role-playing games, though we don't always really granularly talk about the player as an actor. And that's what I was going to talk about in my story segment, which would have been very eloquent. And so I was going to do a big old part about the story, and then I thought, you know what? I think in the ether of my review, ethereally, tenuously, my story commentary is there, and I don't really need to add any more. Then on the last day of editing, which was Sunday, the June 14th, coincidentally the 7th anniversary of the release of the original The Last of Us on PlayStation 3, I accidentally looked at Twitter and I saw that there was a full-blown raging forest fire of discourse happening about The Last of Us Part 2, comparing it to films, comparing it to books. Some people hate it, apparently. They think it's too dark, and some people love it and are saying it's one of the greatest games of all time. I must say, I'm very interested. I love when a game is polarizing. I'm going to play this game probably tomorrow. Probably going to spend all day playing it tomorrow. Maybe I'll even stream it. Who knows? If you're watching this years later, you don't even know what tomorrow means. Now, I don't know how disappointed I should be in myself that I did not expect the Is Games Films conversation to rise from the dead, cattle prod, resurrected, jolted out of its sarcophagus. It's happened about 14 times in 10 years as I've been a dude on the internet, a person in the world who yells about video games for others' entertainment. Even if you come to these videos because you hate me, let's face it, hate is entertainment sometimes, right? So I thought, what can I add to this? And I thought, I gotta add something. I gotta add a segment. So I went to Patreon and I said, I had an idea for a segment as I've sat here polishing and finishing the video and fixing all the audio and making sure there's no loose frames. This idea that I had when I glimpsed the tip of the discourse iceberg had blossomed, and I just had this full idea and I really wanted to do it and I wanted to try my best at it. So I asked you all on Patreon, I said, if 100 of you comment on this post with the phrase "spend a day and do the thing," which sounds kind of like a BioShock Infinite reference. It's not a BioShock Infinite reference. Spend a day and do the thing. I said I would do it, and I ended up with something like 400 comments before I stopped looking. I did spend the day, and I did do the thing. And then I spent a day reckoning with the thing I'd done. So let me tell you about the thing I did. Basically, before I replayed The Last of Us and conducted my analysis and did all my mathematical breakdowns and filed a bunch of data into my secret spreadsheet, before I even played the game, I wanted to do a little bit of homeworky research. So I replayed portions of the game Uncharted 1, Drake's Fortune, and Uncharted 2, Among Thieves, which I mentioned somewhat extensively in the review. The one thing I didn't mention in the review, which I probably would have found an occasion to mention in the section about the story, which I cut, was that I also, prior to replaying the game, to get into the mood, to get into The Last of Us playing mode, I reread Cormac McCarthy's novels The Road, Blood Meridian, or The Evening Redness in the West, and No Country for Old Men. And I rewatched the films Children of Men and No Country for Old Men. A whole lot of men going on in my literary life over here. I didn't rewatch the movie The Road because I don't like that movie. It's got Viggo. I love Viggo Mortensen. He's the Lord of my Rings. Just don't really like that movie. I think it's kind of a janky movie. No offense to it. If you like it, that's okay. You can like whatever you want. I think The Last of Us is a better game than The Road. The movie is a movie. So I reread these books, and then I proceeded to not dissect the plot and themes very deeply at all in this video. I do say at one point that The Last of Us deals out plot beats in a manner texturally similar to literature, and I was coming off having just reread The Road and Blood Meridian immediately before playing the game. I'm not gonna make any sort of a bold statement, and I'm not here to generate any sound bites, though I gotta say, in terms of plotting and pacing and structure, it's pretty good. The Last of Us is pretty good in terms of just fiction writing storytelling. I think I call it gumption at one point. I say it has fiction writing gumption to present its story as a series of short stories. The whole plot occurs over 4 big chunks, that one of which is much, much longer than the others. Pittsburgh's like 3 hours of the game. I've always been a big fan of the fix-up novel. You know what a fix-up novel is? It's a fiction writing term that the short story writer has stitched together the short stories so that they flow into something resembling a novel. I've always been a big fan of that particular template of novel, and I feel like The Last of Us doesn't exactly fit that. Each of those little short stories does flow together really well, and I just do think it's got I like to think of it as like a cuisine element, the way there's just little So yeah, rather than saying it's Citizen Kane or whatever, let's say it's a fancy meal. So I had read all these books, and I just sat on the experience of having read these books, and I did nothing with it. And when I glimpsed the tip of the discourse iceberg, I thought, man, how cool would it be if I just wrote a Cormac McCarthy novel based on The Last of Us? If I just wrote the whole plot out, like beat for beat, shot for shot, just wrote the whole thing in the exact style of The Road. I was like, I could do it. I could do it. Give me 2 weeks. I could do it. However, I only asked you for 1 day, so rather than write a novel, I wrote some kind of a monstrous short story. I think it's about like 5,000 words long. It's not super long. It comes up to about 31 minutes of spoken word recording. And I wasn't able to get Cormac McCarthy's style 100% channeled into my writing. I do write my own fiction. Please do not judge my own fiction, which you have not seen, by the quality of this, whatever it is that you're about to see. Like any self-respecting person, I keep my fiction to myself. Someday, when I think I can do good in the world by doing so, I will publish a piece of my fiction as prominently as is possible. Until then, I'm just going to keep on keeping it to myself. Now, so I wasn't able to get Cormac McCarthy's style 100%. I like elements of his style. Let's face it, it's a little bit silly. Sometimes it's so grim and it's so dark and it's so sad and hard and declarative and godlike that it's just a little bit hilarious. I actually think he has a distinct sense of humor that the Coen brothers very much got in No Country for Old Men when they show, for example, situations that are funny, actually funny only for the viewer, not for the people involved in the scene. Llewellyn Moss trying to get across the Mexican border, talking about doing his service in Vietnam with the guy trying to get back into America. That's an uncomfortable conversation for those two people. For us, it's funny. Anton Chigurh and the gas station attendant, when he asks the gas station attendant to call the coin toss, that's funny for us, not for the gas station guy. I think Cormac McCarthy's got a whole lot of intentional silliness. A lot of it is unintentional, and I realized that and became very aware of it while writing, and I now have a newfound understanding of the particular texture of that guy's writing. And there's a lot of stuff I like about his prose style. Does everybody know there's this Gary Provost lesson, this sentence has 5 words. Look that up. This sentence has 5 words. It's a quick, easy, impressive lesson on how to variate sentence length within a paragraph so that you keep the reader moving along. Micro-pacing. Cormac McCarthy is like the sophomore year class version of that. He doesn't just variate sentence length and word complexity. He will kind of punch you in the stomach with sudden changes from concrete to abstract. And there's this neat texture to it. I'm not going to say my attempt is good at being him. I'm saying I don't want to be him. If you locked me in a room with a bunch of money, I could probably fake it decently. What you're about to see by no means represents a final product. I wrote it fast off the top of my head, and then me and Josh Watson, as quickly as we could, lined up footage. It's about 31 minutes long. I would have loved nothing more than to make a 2-hour-long post-credits sequence for you. That would have been, it's a great joke. I would have loved it to be 1 second longer than the actual review. Didn't have time for that. 5 days, we could have had time for it. Kind of want to see if I can go 5 more days now. Maybe I'll make a Patreon post. That's a joke. I'm not going to do that. Now, while writing this thing, I was cackling. I was Elling MAO. I was louder than the neighbor's dogs. And then when I sat down to record the voiceover, and I did record the voiceover, and I was like,
This is pretty cool.
and then I was listening to it with the game footage lined up and the music under it, and I'm like, oh my God, there's no jokes in here. There's just there's no room to breathe. It's just this suffocating sort of horrible thing. It's this torturous, weird thing. The music is good though, because I used the official music from the game. 2-time Academy Award winner Gustavo Santaolalla. He's there in the video, so check it out for him. I don't know, I'm gonna Google fair use when this is over. Now, if you haven't played The Last of Us Part 1 and you want to, and you don't want to be spoiled, this video is going to spoil absolutely everything about it. So don't watch it if you want to play the game for yourself someday. You have 1 day before the sequel comes out. Comes out tomorrow. Probably going to play it tomorrow. Again, if you're watching this years later, you have no idea what tomorrow is. If you have played The Last of Us Part 1 and you'd like some kind of refreshment, remember the game to reflect upon the experience before you play the sequel, I'd say check this one out. There's probably some 5-minute, 2-minute, 3-minute. You could summarize this game in 2 minutes probably. I thought I was going to do it in 10 minutes. I thought I was going to write 1,500 words, and then I started writing the beginning part, and I was just having way too much fun, so I just gave it the 5,000. A nice even treatment. One nice coat. Didn't edit it at all, so there's that. There's probably some 5-minute, 6-minute, 3-minute, 2-minute, 8-minute, 9-minute, 4-minute, IGN, GameSpot, Polygon, Kotaku. Somebody probably has some sort of a summary. I didn't watch any of those. I didn't need to because I've done played the game very recently, twice, and and then ruminated upon volumes, gigabytes of recorded footage. I don't need to watch any sort of summary. So I made my own, and I did it me style, and I did it McCarthy style, and I would not have even thought to do this had I not had a venue such as Patreon where I can ask people, hey, would you guys like it if I did something weird? I didn't even tell you what I was going to do. You all asked me to do it anyway. I said, I got something, and I can't tell you what it is, though if you tell me to do it, I'll do it. I did it, and I guess I've introduced it long enough. You should probably watch it now, and I'll see you next time with Doom. Gonna be a big one, gonna be a weird one, gonna be a good one, and I hope you thought this one was a good one too, and if you didn't, maybe the next 30 minutes will change your mind. If it doesn't, truth is I can't change your mind about anything. The world ate itself on his birthday night. His daughter on the couch looked at the clock. It wasn't midnight. She gave him a simple, strong watch as a present. He asked her, "How do you afford this?" And she said, "I sell hardcore drugs." And he said, "Good, you can help with the mortgage." After that, he put her to bed, and what she dreamed is still between her and God. She woke and spent the rest of her life fearing. She never saw her father again. The man she saw in her father's clothes and skin had a desperation that belonged to no one she had ever known and everyone he would ever know after. Her father's brother came and they tried to get away together and no one could get away. The city was burning. A gas station exploded. You can't get away from something nobody's ever seen. Nobody knew yet not to trust anybody. Seconds that years later feel like minutes to think about passed in the questionless dark. The world changed in a night that night, and he stood riding the edge of that change. His watch had broken when he fell. If time heals all wounds, then what he had either wasn't a wound, or time had wounded itself, and time can't heal itself. For years, nightly and morningly, he would go on to recollect his inaction and genuflect toward regret, and always finally settle outside himself, on a notion that if the world had changed only a little faster. For 20 years he ate and felt the knowledge that who those years had made him would have changed a little faster than the world did that night. A wound can also be a part of you. A scar is a body part. His partner woke him from it. She poured a drink. She did not enjoy it. She had information. Someone who had done them wrong had become vulnerable to a worse wrong. The man did not hesitate. Scraps of civilization, gray and hard. Vehicles louder than speech. Some government-like remainers were taking temperatures. Someone tried to run and the man watched them get shot. They traversed a courtyard nature was working hard to reclaim. He did not owe this place reflections. It wasn't ever his home before. Upstairs in a broken red brick building, he saw nature had decided to retake even man's imitations of nature. They wore gas masks and traversed a yellow basement dark. An individual had fallen there and breathed in some spores. He begged the man to kill him. The man killed him without sadness or darkness. The man didn't reflect anymore on how life used to never ask him these questions. At some point, before becomes a shorter forever than after. In the city, the people like clothing animated. Their enemies pretended they wanted to talk. Really, nobody wanted to talk. His partner didn't want to talk. They spoke instead the caveman's language. Now their ultimate adversary wanted to talk. He told the woman and the man of an opportunity to make some money to live a little closer to whatever better was. They killed him. They met the woman who'd offered their dead enemy the alleged smuggling job. Something electric about her particular desperation. She brought them to the package. The package was a girl. They planned to take her out of the city and away from the vehicles and firearm cacophony of the broken authorities by darkfall. The man didn't know yet to let the girl remind him of someone. The man spread out on a couch alone, recognizing neither himself nor his ghosts. The girl no more precious to himself than himself. In loud, rainy dark, they inched through mud and fear. The straggling clutchers of law wielded their authority. They were taking temperatures. Violence happened on its own accident. The man and his partner learned the girl was infected. Even a child had the capacity to betray. The girl said the bite had happened 3 weeks ago. When they didn't believe her, they were treating her like they treated everybody. They thought to walk away. Weighing need and fear, they decided their job would only last the night anyway. All they had to do was hand the girl off. In an old subway station and then a disused museum, they negotiated actionlessly with hate wraiths. Everybody had changed forever. Some people changed differently. They could see the golden dome of their destination like a halo without an angel. Their contact was dead already. The authorities didn't appreciate tricks. The woman told the man to take the girl and run, to take her to the doctors in what used to be Colorado. The woman told the man the girl was the cure, and he asked her when she started believing anything. She showed him she'd been bitten. When his eyes had not pointed at her, her life had changed completely in a painful instant. Small actions and big movements both can happen when a man isn't looking. In the end, she decided to die believing in one thing. He saw in her the very top of man's hope and buried that hope in every afterward breath. The girl spoke to him later, and he did not hear her because he had long ago deafened himself to every word resembling apology. The man and the girl, together now a week. Farther from the city, gray became green. The world here paid no mind to the color of human hearts. The man didn't tell the girl how he knew the person he knew here. Hunkering wraiths, too gone inside themselves to eat each other, sprang into hunger for the man and the girl. The man's friend found them struggling. The man's friend knew of a truck the man and the girl could use. They needed to battle through a dilapidated high school and crack-fallen hollow neighborhood to get to the truck. They battled against many of the yelling husks. Sometimes during this morbid routine of kill, the wraiths' predictability and ignorance to one another appealed to the man like a loyalty. Forever is forever. Theirs darker than his, though forever all the same. Nature makes romance where it can, where it has to. In the man's friend's house, they found the man's friend's friend hanging dead. Upstairs, the man found a letter. The man's friend had left the world hating. The man's friend reacted without reacting. The man thought one way is as good as another. A scar is a body part. They pushed the truck out and down a hill toward orange twilight, and the girl turned the key and the truck didn't start, and they pushed it again as the yelling husks objected to life, and life fought back until the truck started. The man told his friend, "You could come with us," and the man's friend said he'd rather leave himself to himself, and the man knew especially that he didn't know what anyone meant to themselves. They pointed the truck west and drove with desperation that at some silent moment within passing hours transpired into routine. The sky gray-black, the cracking asphalt wet reflective, and the window glass rain-speckled. The man let himself feel tired. Behind him, the girl scavenged the rectangle of available civilization. She found artifacts. A magazine with naked men embarrassed the man, and she now knew he could be embarrassed. A comic book told a simple story of capability and hope that she knew people in the time before her time had known. She found a cassette tape and asked the man if it was from his time, and he told her it was from before his time. And now she knew that there were times before the time before her time. The truck came to life with the ancient music. Alive for a while, he knew that every time was before her time, and that her time was not a time at all. Soon, in a sense, only the cold part of the world understands anything that is now will be before everyone's time. He chose to pass through rather than around a small metropolis. A human in stress begged assistance, and the girl expressed sympathy infinitely disproportionate to the man's. He had guessed at the bottom of man's desperation before and did not wish for an objective answer today. There were more of them. They attacked. The truck crashed and became forever useless in a brutal instant. The man awoke in interrupted consciousness later. He might have missed an hour or a week. Desperate men argued for his and the girl's lives and belongings. By reflex, the man's struggle ended in success. Alive again, they walked a day through the grass-blasted asphalt of a downtown. Broken buildings with more windows than walls. Foliage here strikes like a kind of rot itself. The breath of God grazing the earth and fogging it green. An old river infesting a daylight street. The girl couldn't swim. He could. He found her a raft. He delivered her to the lobby of an old hotel. She asked little questions about cafes, and he told her he had liked to drink coffee at cafes, and he did not think she would never drink coffee at a cafe. Wallpaper peeling, wood stinking, floors creaking. The hotel packed with ancient loot, magnetizing squatters. Every useful artifact a new necessity. Necessity as distinguishable from greed as greed distinguishable from breathing. Whispers passing each other in a forest before language. Recognition of another life, the same as anger. Again he struggled with a gun in his hand. Again senseless success. They came to a decrepit, mold-stinking elevator shaft. He helped the girl up a ledge, and before he could help himself, the ground gave way. A large pain broke his concentration, and now he was in water in a dark basement. The girl above him, picture-framed and backlit. He told her he'd find her, and he didn't see the look on her face when she believed him. The basement mustard dark, he gas-masked toward a way up. When the fungus came, it made men as immortal as hungry. He reckoned again that they didn't need the food they sought, that what owned them sustained them itself, and that some mere speckle of ancient sport or remnant affection alone drove them to kill. Here these husks had hunkered in this foodless seclusion for so many years as to have grown blind. He knew that to think a kill a mercy put kindness into it, and he did not need kindness. The men in the hotel kitchen did not need kindness either. Whispers passing in a forest before language, locking eyes and conjuring sacrificial ritual hate. He made the mistake of, for an instant, forgetting an animal's fear of heights. An assailant at a ladder top crashed him to earth. One of his minds, content to drown in a nose's depth of water, the other stretching fingers for a firearm. Before he could take it, it lifted itself toward heaven, a silent ascension, a thunderclap. His now forever nameless enemy languagelessly dead. The girl gripping the gun, fingers still danger-cravingly precarious upon the trigger. "I killed the heck out of that guy," she said, and he said, "You did," and he made her give him the gun, because it was his gun. Though now he knew what she could do with it if she had to, and that moment architected an unfortune that this is how he recognizes her in his forever forward memory. She begins to him by reminding himself of himself. He talked easier to her now in a disused ballroom drenched in decorations of a forgotten celebration. He asked and appreciated her help in pushing a piano so they could climb higher. In a crow's nest now, he trusted her to watch him. He gave her a meticulous gun and told her to help him clear the downtown. He told her to hold her shoulder high and forget to hesitate. He didn't see the look she gave him when he turned his back, an expression of both trust and fear. Desperation didn't go away. It did, however, change from time to time. Perched high like an angel, she saved him again with a loud and invisible voice. They moved again toward the outside of a city. There two whispers passed two other whispers in that forest before language, and all four hesitated in what very well might have turned into danger. They'd found friends. A big brother and a little brother as wary of the others as the man and the girl were. The little brother's eyes fell on a toy from before his time and his brother's time, and the man spectated the little brother's big brother reject, as probably always, any attempt to manufacture unowned sentimentality. They ventured to the boys' refuge and basked for an afternoon in the grace with which the moment had given them companions in considering an enemy. By nightfall, they killed their way toward the city limits. The enemy thickened. The man was too slow clambering to his safety. The brothers left him to his own. They urged the girl to follow. She left them, the man incredulous at her dedication. He'd long ago given up the art of expectation. She followed him in his fast crawl. Under unnecessary attack from civilization resembling fear-fearing, faceless hate husks, they fell from a bridge into dark water and woke on a beach under a blanket of quiet. The man saw the big brother. He couldn't stop anger. He pointed a gun. The big brother said he knew he was going to be okay, and the man knew the boy had known no such thing because nobody knows any such thing anymore. He allowed the boy his innocence for a while because some fragment of him no longer wanted to see the bad in everything. They walked a beach by night and scavenged a run-aground boat. Some people back then had avoided eyewitnessing the fullness of the depravity by way of a coincidental boating vacation. The four spelunked into an old sewer, tunnels dark and warm. They saw homes of the run-aground boaters. People had been comfortable here. They had had children here. Children had been comfortable here. They had died comfortable here. Children had died here. Scribbled on a nursery floor, a shame-flinching death letter by a shocked, gone parent disclaiming to future archaeologists that they didn't suffer. He saw now the bottom of man's hope. He imagined someone who, if they died, he'd want to die too. He recognized wanting and doing as different darknesses. Some once human monsters showed themselves in the dark. Again, a successful struggle. They burst out of the darkness into the light and saw writ on the wall around the door which they had exited a too-late warning that danger lurked inside. Now they strolled a rotten suburb empty of life. He found alcohol, rags, sugar, and blades in a tattered house. Loud red-painted letters on a white house warned off looters. An alphabetical ghost. Stopped in the grass-blasted road stood a dead ice cream truck. The girl asked what it was, and the man told her it was a truck that drove around and sold ice cream to children, and the girl laughed and didn't believe him. And he knew she'd never bought anything from anybody face-to-face and friendly, and that she'd never seen ice cream neither. At the distant end of a long row of houses, a faceless hate shouted with a powerful firearm. The man offered to slip ahead in building shadows and behind walls and through kitchens and basements to stop the sniper. He snuck upon an expecting enemy. He killed. He manned the gun to exterminate the friends of his dead enemy. Eventually, the hate of the old, gone world bubbled up and struck, and he sent as many of them to oblivion as he could. The man, the girl, the big brother, and the little brother slipped through a fence and to the place the boys had promised to meet their friends. The man had forgotten the nature of that place. He knew now that they'd been traveling with the boys only because their general directions were the same. The boys' friends didn't show up and probably wouldn't. They passed an easy night with canned food and conversation. The girl and the little brother alone in a room. She offered him the toy his brother had refused him. "I picked it up," she said. She told him nobody has to know. He didn't thank her. She left him at last, rejectful of nostalgia for a time before he was. At some time when no one's eyes had pointed toward him, a husk had bitten his leg, which now festered. He spent a hot night appreciating alone a mastery of one small forever, the only while he owned. The next morning, the man and the big brother cooked breakfast and talked easily. The girl went to wake the little brother. He was gone and standing. The man aimed to kill by reflex. The big brother lashed out. The big brother shot his little brother, who now died again on the floor. beneath the man's mind, he remembered a notion. Think about one who'd die and leave you wanting to die too. He saw now space below the bottom of man's hope. They both saw it. He wished that she hadn't. See the man and the girl together now a season at least. 4 months acquainted and talking easier. Walking in a forest of an autumn at some forgotten time, change it into warmer found garments. Long and slow their conversations in a misty forest. They found a grave no bigger than a child in the woods, and she wanted to talk about what they'd seen together, as she sometimes did, and he didn't want her to. He didn't consider the preciousness of the place she now occupied, what she reminded him of. He took her to his brother. His brother and more of us struggled less unpleasantly than the man had lately in an old factory. The girl saw a horse, and the man and the girl talked of horses like friends. The man's brother gave him a photograph. The man didn't look at the photograph. The man gave the photograph back. The brother boasted that he and his optimistic friends had managed to reinvent electricity in this building. The man, alone with his brother, confronted him with a request. "You owe me something," the man told his brother. Everybody knew nobody owed anybody anything anymore. The man told his brother to take the girl. The man knew his brother knew the people who wanted the girl, the people who were looking for the cure. The man's brother couldn't comprehend the man's desperate need to be rid of the girl. The man didn't comprehend it himself and had no chance to, because hate broke in, as it often did, and the man and his brother had to kill opportunistic wanderers who had, in greed, spectated the reinvention of electricity. Their enemies killed, they took stock. The girl had deduced the man's plan and fled on a horse. The man knew she'd want to be alone. However, alone was danger in this life. The man and his brother took to horseback and followed the only path the girl could have. Along the way, some ramshackle squatting venues appropriated by desperation. They killed again in routine reflex. They chanced upon a ranch house and saw the horse the girl had taken. They hitched their horses and went inside. He spied a fallen-over dresser in the hallway. Had the divine interiorist again designed him a geometrical refuge against the unexpected? He found her in a disappeared girl's bedroom, reading a book and wondering aloud about the simplicity of old life. He told her to come with him, and she expressed unease, and he told her she was going to go with his brother, and she exclaimed his daughter. The man's brother's wife had told her about the man's daughter. She said, "I'm not her," and he said, "No, you're not," and he had never hated anything with such unlethal, consumptive ferocity. Hate had followed them, and its arrival quashed a speakable epiphany, and in the routine of the killing he reckoned all of his forevers, some longer than others, the ones after longer than the one before, and he achieved some peace he never spoke. Back at a vantage overlooking his brother's abode, he told the girl to come with him. He apologized to his brother for the horse he was about to steal. His brother allowed it. Now, much later, on horseback across grass-blasted asphalt, they came into Colorado with an optimism. He told her, "This is a university." She occupied a precious place now, behind him on the horse. He told her children became adults while living here and learning. He trusted her to wait on the horse as he crawled through muck and mustard dust and contended with predictable monsters in gasping, gas-masked darkness. He found alcohol and blades and other useful items in a garage. He saw lawn chairs, 2 of them, and knew people were once comfortable here, before going somewhere he'd never live to understand. They saw monkeys in the courtyard. She'd never seen monkeys. He had. He didn't wonder why they were seeing monkeys now and here. They were looking for a building they heard looked like a mirror. They found it, and they entered a laboratory. Whom they had expected to meet there was gone in a probable hurry. Every distant whisper a quiver of fear. Rattles and clatters. Monkeys making innocent noise in an old lab, occupying the parodical posture of ghosts in all that hollow. They found evidence of where the levers had left to. Salt Lake City. They had a little further to go. Now the man and the girl knew why the Leavers had left. Drastic armored enviers attacked with a desperation tantamounting anger, God's wrath flowing down and filling up everyone in a situation turgid. He struggled as always in routine, a cascade of momentary reflex successes. Then a disaster. He fell. A rusty spike impaled him clean through. He knew it had missed his vital organs because part of him over slow years had learned how to tell right away if you've survived. She descended to him. He felt his speed bleed out of him. He fought his best. Now she occupied a precious place in front of him. He did not see himself so much now as a man or a figment. He saw now one child with 2 or more ghosts, and he lost himself in a hot comfort seeing this. In the forest of a winter now, the girl hunted with a bow and arrow. She killed a rabbit and then saw a deer. She shot the deer clean. It survived and bled. She tracked the sensible beast until it struggled away from life. She came across 2 men, one older and bearded and the other younger and clean-shaven. They stood over her kill, discussing meat volume. She greeted them with the sort of threat she'd slowly learned. They offered to trade. She said, "You can have the deer if you bring antibiotics." She demanded that the older bearded man stay while the younger clean-shaven man ran off to their camp to fetch the medicine. The girl and the bearded man waited together. She stopped his attempts at conversation. Some of the old dead attacked, and the girl and the bearded man defended themselves in a cold shack with reflexes sharpened by perfunctory wisdom. She did not trust the bearded man. She did well not to. He and his companion closed on her with invisibly sinister intentions. She broke free after managing to grip the essential medicine. She ran back to the man as he lay convalescing quiet beneath heavy blankets in a frozen basement, and she injected the antibiotics that might save him. The men came for her. She escaped on her precious horse, who soon died gunshot beneath a snowy hill. Now she eluded the men in a snow-decrepit lake resort and killed when she could. They took her soon and caged her, and she began to suspect their nature. The man awoke with his usual fright. He called to the girl. He might have dreamed of her for a long time. He became quickly aware of the notion of lurking others. Blind in snow wind, he struggled forward in this new place. Some other men tried to kill the man, however, time had not offered the other men the same opportunities to learn from desperation. The man subdued the other men and made them beg for impossible mercy. Amidst the prisoners' begging, the man extracted information. He killed his prisoners and continued moving. Meanwhile, the girl found herself on a kitchen table and the evilest of the men with a broad knife. She shouted her infection. She said, "I'm infected." She asked them to roll up her sleeve, to look at her scar. In their shock and confusion, she escaped. Now she found herself in a vast banquet hall. Her aspiring killer in scramble had knocked over a flame lantern, and an accidental arson had begun to unfurl itself. She evaded him when she could. She glimpsed him vulnerable. She stabbed him with her old knife. Meanwhile, the man battled through the loud wind of snow and into a dark food service back room. He saw a paper scrap with a list of poundages and volumes. He saw many pieces of old luggage occupying a shelf, their bearers now part of the wind. He saw the girl's backpack. He took it. He entered a freezer room and saw human bodies hanging dead and preserved fresh for a grim later. An unthinking chaos later, she lay prone in view of a knife. Her oppressor taunted her from above, begging her to take the knife. He thought her will gone. He thought wrong. Flames shrieked. With invisible strength unbelievable, her mind complete, she hated him again and again with the blade. The man found her there a long moment later, struggling in victory below him as he had once struggled in defeat below her. He touched her then, and she said, "Don't touch me." He knew he needed her. He had seen the bottom of men's souls. She had not seen it. She had, however, had occasion to perfectly imagine it, and imagining it was worse. A season later, they reached Salt Lake City. She gave him the photograph his brother had tried to give him in Wyoming. He took it and thanked her. He loved her now, without saying it or thinking it. Love, a wisp of spirit to dissipate upon casual utterance. He spoke his daughter's name to her. He told her that she and her would have been friends. The girl grew distant. She did not respond to words for a short while. She then ran off, scaring him. In shock, he chased her. Now he saw what had surprised her. A tribe of giraffes had occupied the city center. She had never seen a giraffe. Maybe he hadn't either. A giraffe came close and he petted its face and told her it was like a big horse. They stood looking out at a peaceful world for a while and talked to each other like friends or relatives might. Together they dealt with the darkness of the one last tunnel between themselves and their long goal. Some miserable remnants objected to their crossing, and they conducted the same grim routine as always. Talking easy, they came through a flooded concrete chamber and into a flooded stretch of tunnel. Capsized and submerged vehicles made a loose bridge, and they traversed with caution until caution didn't suffice. She tried to save him from drowning and fell in the water herself. She still couldn't swim. He'd thought time and again that someday he would teach her. After. He hadn't taught her. After wasn't here yet. He clutched her body and let the water tow them like a missile until a dirty, cracked asphalt shore. Men in uniforms with guns confiscated the unconscious man and the unconscious girl. He awoke in a hospital. The woman who'd given him the girl greeted him. He hadn't seen her in a year. She said she'd given up hope. She thanked him. She told him the girl was in an operating room. She told him they had to remove the girl's brain. He saw himself from afar. He boiled. The woman turned on him with the hostility inherent in one who'd just received a great favor. An escort eagerly ushered him outward. Why wouldn't they at least let him stay? Unthinking, his reflexes struggled into their accustomed pattern. Lights loose and shadows swaying in that old, dust-smelling public labyrinth. He killed until he found her. He hesitated for longer than long ago he'd have guessed he ever would before he shot the surgeon who was about to cut her. He held her the way he had held her as he ran toward the elevator in a fever. He did not consider danger. He was already dead. He was already alive. In the garage, the woman met him. She told him she didn't blame him. He shot the woman in the stomach. He told her he knew she'd just come after the girl. Whether he knew that for certain or not is his and God's business. He didn't rationalize until later, though he never did give words to those eventual rations. Maybe if we can't save one of us, we can't save the rest of us. He put her in a car and drove fast. She breathed later, and it sounded like the perfect truth. She awoke again after many hours he spent wondering if she'd known all along, and if she did, whether their lives now would become a game or a fight. He lied to her that the scientists had said she wasn't special and that they hadn't needed her after all, and that the doctors had in fact determined that no one would ever get better. He looked her in the eye in the rearview mirror and he told her they'd given up on finding a cure. He told her nothing could fix us and that we'd all just have to deal with it together. She either believed him or she didn't. Somewhere where his brother was, more of us were figuring out how to be just fine, and he knew where that was, and he considered loving it, so he took her there. On the precipice of settlement, the girl spoke to the man of herself in a way she never had. She told him about the day she received her useless wound. She said her friend had been with her then, and her friend had gotten bitten too, and together they promised to tell no one else of their grim sentences. They promised each other affectionate spectation, her gone friend had said. we'll lose our minds together. The girl's friend lost her mind alone, and the girl said she still waited for her turn. Life warming and green, the air delicious. He could see a home. After wasn't here yet. The man thought we all lose our minds all the time, though not always in the sense life makes us expect. She asked him again if he'd told her the truth, and he told her he had, and she looked him in the eye and she told him she believed him.